Beneath the shadow of the great tree called Konoha, one clan has lived under suspicion for generations. Uchiha. Blood and fire. Loyal, yet never submissive. When trust is betrayed. When justice becomes nothing but empty words. Separation. Not born of hatred, but because the path is no longer shared. The Sharingan sees through every lie. The will of Uchiha does not bow to the Hokage. This is a story of choice, and the price paid for freedom. I am Uchiha, the division of Konoha. When a clan steps out of the shadows, Hokage's office. With a smacking sound in his mouth as he smoked his pipe, the third Hokage looked at Kakashi, who had come to report, his eyes filled with complex emotions. Hada Kakashi, undeniably the most outstanding ninja genius of Konoha, was born with attributes that were inextricably linked to his father, especially his exceptional talent. The son of the White Fang, the fourth Hokage's student, was truly the protagonist of a novel. Kakashi, only this morning, Mano Gai, Saratobi Isuma, Yui Kuradai, Mitarashi Anko, Iron Steel, Kamizuki Izuma, and Ibisu, your classmates, came to see me, begging me to transfer you out of the Anbu. As for Kakashi, after the Ninetales' death, his personality became even more gloomy and eccentric, and he adopted a suicidal, fearless fighting style in battle. He had heard that within the Anbu, a cold-blooded Kakashi had even become known as such. At this moment, the third Hokage secretly exhaled a thick cloud of smoke, speaking to the Konoha genius ninja Kakashi before him. However, Kakashi showed not the slightest change in expression. His indifference extended not only to everyone, but also to his own life. Looking at Kakashi's indifferent gaze, the third Hokage frowned and shook his head. Kakashi, I never imagined that war would inflict such deep wounds on you. If they hadn't come looking for me, I wouldn't have believed it. The after effects of war, yes, they exist, but even for an exceptional ninja, it's hard to believe. He truly never imagined Kakashi would have this kind of condition. Kakashi, an Anbu member, possessed a sharp sword, but this sword needed maintenance. The third Hokage couldn't bear the thought of breaking such a still-developing, untouched treasure sword, so he decided to sheath it and properly maintain it for a period of time. Kakashi, you need to rest now. Now Kakashi's eyes revealed a cold indifference. Towards the third Hokage, he could only remain silent and bow his head. He was now completely an obedient machine, or rather, a purely instrumental ninja. Kakashi, I heard that you and Uchiha Yuri sparred last night and neither won. The atmosphere became stifling. The third Hokage, a long-standing and respected politician, casually lowered his head with a smile, slowly refilling his pipe with tobacco, and then seemingly nonchalantly asked a question. After hearing this, Kakashi bowed his head and said in a low voice, I lost. Calm. It was as if he wasn't speaking to himself at all. At this moment, Kakashi didn't care about the title of genius at all. After all, this was the darkest time in his life, a time when he could even be indifferent to his own existence. But the third Hokage, after hearing this, smiled and shook his head, saying, Could you tell me a little about what happened in last night's battle? It seemed like he was asking a question, but it was clear he already knew everything, yet he still thought he needed Kakashi Kakuzu to find out. Wearing his mask, Kakashi resembled an Anbu returning from a mission to report on his work, bowing his head and coldly recounting everything that happened the previous night. The battle unfolded with these things. Uchiha Yori's chakra level reached Jonin level, his control over his power far surpassed that of ordinary Jonin, his taijutsu reached Jonin level, and he was proficient in fire release and lightning release. Based on current intelligence analysis, Uchiha Yori's overall strength has reached Jonin level. At this moment, the third Hokage narrowed his eyes as he listened to Kakashi's report, and in his heart, he had a clear understanding. Uchiha Yoru, Orochimaru's disciple and grand disciple, had indeed reached the Jonin level of strength under the Sharingan's enhancement. Ninetales Knight awakened his bloodline ability at 14 years old, unlocking the Sharingan. Within 6 months, he evolved into Tamagatama's, a 15-year-old Jonin. He was indeed a genius, but his abilities were largely inherited through his own bloodline. The Sharingan possesses the abilities of observation, copying, hypnosis, and surpasses the observational skills of ordinary people. Furthermore, it is a natural genjutsu eye. It can be said that once the Sharingan is awakened, The genjutsu aspect directly leaps 1,000 miles. The third Hokage analyzed Uchiha Yoru's current strength and concluded that if it were a life or death battle, and Kakashi hadn't appeared in the situation he was in last night, Uchiha Yoru's strength might not have been enough to win. Kakashi, how many years have you been a member of the Anbu? Suddenly, the third Hokage let out a weak, melancholic sigh, resembling a benevolent old man looking at a junior. Kakashi, hearing this, respectfully said in a low voice, "It's been almost 2 years since the fourth Hokage joined the team." Wearing his mask and bowing his head, Kakashi, whose expression showed no change, respectfully replied, "Well, the third Hokage, after hearing this, took a puff from his pipe and with a benevolent, caring demeanor, sighed and said, originally, Minato brought you into the Anbu to dispel the darkness in your heart. Upon my return to the position of Hokage, I will continue to take over the fourth Anbu. However, 2 years have passed so quickly, and not only has the darkness in your heart not been dispelled, Kakashi, your post-war after effects have become even more severe. If Asuma hadn't mentioned it to me, I wouldn't have known you were in such a serious condition." First, he displayed a gentle demeanor, a kind and caring, elder-like air. This was the third Hokage's old-fashioned tactic. But it was precisely this tactic that allowed him to attract countless ninjas, some falling before him, others rising to the challenge. "Kakashi, you'll only become more evil like this, and the overly burdensome Anbu mission will actually plunge you into an uncontrollable darkness." At this moment, the third Hokage, under the watchful gaze of a senior figure, shook his head and sighed, saying, "Kakashi, take off your mask. You need to ease your burden of missions to heal the wounds in your heart." Now Kakashi, like a machine, coldly and slowly removed his Anbu mask. For him, there was only execution. When Kakashi removed his mask, revealing his youthful expression, a hint of regret flashed in the third Hokage's eyes. Such a young genius! What a pity! "Kakashi, outwardly I will remove you from your Anbu position, but secretly you will be directly assigned by me. There is one mission, Kakashi. You yourself should consider whether you want to take it on." Upon hearing this, Hada Kakashi coldly and calmly said, "Kakashi is willing to accept the mission." At this moment, Kakashi had no hesitation whatsoever, or rather, this was the darkest period of his life. Perhaps only relentless missions could stop him from reflecting on those painful memories. When the third Hokage heard that Kakashi was willing to take on the mission, he didn't rush to explain the mission, but instead leaned his head to look out the window at Hokage Rock. "Kakashi, the village has just gone through 3 wars, and I won't even mention how brutal they were. Last year's Ninetales Rebellion almost shattered the shinobi world's established order, nearly triggering a 4th Great Ninja War. All of this was because of the Ninetales. That night, you must have seen the Ninetales in your Sharingan eyes. I'm telling you clearly, there's a mastermind behind the Ninetales Rebellion, and this person is very likely from the Uchiha clan. The Sharingan is an undeniable fact, but the third Hokage used old-fashioned tactics, first bringing up the village's moral high ground, then slowly drawing it into the mission. I heard that Uchiha Yoru invited you to join the police department last night, after I remove you from your Anbu position. Madogai will go to the police department to request Uchiha Yoru's services. At that time, you can use this opportunity to legitimately join the police department. I hope you can investigate in secret whether the Uchiha clan is the mastermind behind the scenes." Finally, the third Hokage exhaled a thick cloud of mist, which swirled around and obscured his vision, his aged, solemn voice slowly echoing through the office. "Konoha Police Department. Yoru, Kakashi is too dangerous to be in the Anbu in this state. We need to ask the third Hokage for help. Kakashi's Anbu position has been revoked, but with Kakashi's mental injuries, even going on missions outside would be dangerous. So please help us tonight." Inside the office, Madogai was respectfully kneeling, even more so as to respectfully ask for a favor. "Yes, sir, right now, only the patrol team of the police force and the prison guards can allow Kakashi to rest and recuperate properly for a while." Seeing Madogai swallow his pride and personally go to the police department to plead with Kakashi, Uchiha Yoru sighed, reflecting on the relationship between the two, and said, "Guy, I understand your worries. After all, Kakashi is my classmate. But I'm afraid Kakashi won't accept it. Yoru, rest assured, I, Kakashi, will bring him here." At this moment, Madogai looked up, his eyes filled with determination. Kakashi was in too much danger. Something could easily happen. Being a ninja was inherently a high-risk profession. If their skills were inferior, that would be one thing after all. They could disregard life and death. But if it was due to mental trauma, they knew it was impossible to ignore it. Uchiha Yoruichi, my deputy, was also worried about Kakashi's demeanor and inwardly fell into deep thought. That night, he had merely spoken a casual, probing remark, intending to communicate more with Kakashi later. After all, Kakashi was going through the darkest period of his life right now, and it was his last chance. Once Kakashi's temperament becomes as hard as a rock, it will be difficult to persuade him, or rather, difficult to advise him. Kakashi was dismissed from his Anbu position. Madogai, with a resolute and determined expression, came forward to plead with him. Something seemed amiss. Watching Madogai retreat, Uchiha Yoru's eyebrows furrowed even more, revealing a look of distress. It's really ridiculous to think of police officers as spies. They're the kind of people who would immediately think of planting a spy. If he hadn't known the original plot, he would probably have been deceived as well, truly believing that it was Madogai, Sarutobi Isuma, and others who had jointly requested it, and that Sarutobi only released Kakashi from his Anbu position after learning about it, following Madogai's enthusiastic approach, which led him to the police department to seek help from his old classmate. This matter became a perfectly logical and reasonable event. As a fellow student, upon discovering Kakashi's mental trauma, it was natural to advise him and seek help. He went to the third Hokage, but the third Hokage was shocked, saying, "I don't know either." After learning the truth, he immediately dismissed Kakashi from his Anbu position and sent him home to rest. Ultimately, Madogai, deeply concerned about Kakashi's situation, thought it over carefully and concluded that joining the police force seemed like the most suitable position. It was not only less stressful, but also less dangerous. And wouldn't that give Kakashi time to recover from his emotional wounds? Konoha Memorial Monument. Under the setting sun, Kakashi's eyes were somewhat vacant, as if lost in memories. Around the lawn were neatly arranged tombstones, burying all the heroes who had died fighting bravely for Konoha. The tombstones bore the names of all of them. Just then, a series of footsteps echoed, and Kakashi, reacting instinctively, snapped out of his reverie, his eyes fixed on the figure approaching from behind. All that could be seen was a person with their head wrapped in bandages, and like Kakashi, only one eye was visible. The person was wearing a loose, dark blue outfit and was slowly walking towards the memorial stone. "You are Hada Kakashi, aren't you?" The person who arrived looked at Kakashi with a calm demeanor, and although the other party didn't recognize him, Kakashi, as a ninja who had worked in the Anbu for so many years, certainly knew him. "Lord Danzo," Kakashi respectfully addressed him, knowing that the person before him was Shimura Danzo, the most mysterious and deeply hidden leader of Root, one of Konoha's 6 departments, whose status was second only to the Hokage. Danzo walked over to Kakashi, where a bandage covered his forehead, revealing only one eye. The single eye calmly looked at Kakashi and said coldly, "Kakashi, I heard you've been dismissed from your Anbu position. Would you like to work under me?" Kakashi was completely bewildered after hearing this. He had already been relieved of his Anbu duties, which was all in the open, so why go to Root? The 4th Hokage, who brought you into the Anbu, is no longer in this world. You will be reinstated as a subordinate of the 3rd Hokage. And the 3rd Hokage, a pacifist, is the one who prolonged the war and caused the deaths of Obito and Rin. Danzo calmly recounted the story, as if he were talking about something completely ordinary, but Kakashi, upon hearing it, no longer maintained his usual indifference. Instead, his expression became serious. In the original anime, Danzo engages in a conversation with Kakashi. Shimura Danzo, with a cold and indifferent demeanor, continued, "Moreover, during the Ninetales attack that night, you were forbidden from joining the fight against the Ninetales because of the 3rd Hokage's orders. And wasn't the 4th Hokage killed precisely because of this? First, it's worth mentioning that Sarutobi Hiruzen made a grave mistake in the 3 Great Wars, plunging Konoha into a prolonged war, and the 3rd Hokage's subsequent dismissal was also due to this." Then, mentioning Kakashi-sensei's son, Namikaze Minato, he directly brought up the 3rd Hokage's order from that night, which forbade the younger generation from participating in the battle. Shimura Danzo may not possess Sarutobi Hiruzen's ability to charm people, but he has his own unique qualities. Upon hearing these words, Kakashi couldn't help but show a flicker of emotion. This scene was witnessed by Shimura Danzo, whose eye, hidden behind the bandage, narrowed, revealing a sinister smile, while his other eye remained calm and indifferent. I didn't expect this to be his scheme to become Hawkeye, but Konoha's future cannot be entrusted to someone like him. After saying that, Shimura Danzo slowly walked to the memorial stone, placed a handful of white chrysanthemums on it, and then left without looking back. As he turned around, a cold, sinister smile curled at the corner of his mouth. Sarutobi, Kakashi is a genius, and he's the sharpest sword. You keep choosing to recruit him, but a sword only threatens the enemy when it's unsheathed, not kept hidden in its scabbard at home. At this time, Hada Kakashi was only 15 years old. Although he had gone through many things, his mindset hadn't yet reached the level of unwavering determination he would later develop. When Danzo, with his own ulterior motives, tried to manipulate him, Kakashi's eyes immediately revealed a multitude of complex emotions. The Knight of the Nine Tails. Was this a scheme orchestrated by the third Hawkeye to ascend to the position of Hawkeye? Shimura Danzo was indeed a master of manipulating the dark side of people. Although he didn't explicitly state it, just one sentence was enough to plunge Kakashi into a dark abyss. At this moment, Kakashi's eyes, filled with bewilderment, were even more confused. The third Hawkeye had ordered them not to participate in the Ninetales night battle. This was an undeniable fact. But at that time, the third Hawkeye had already stepped down from his position behind the scenes and wasn't the fourth Hawkeye in power. Why would the third Hawkeye issue such an order? And then there was that night, when the one who died was his fourth teacher, and also his teacher's wife, the teacher who turned the child into a Jinchuriki. But the Jinchuriki encountered them. Those scenes kept flashing before him, and the gentle, smiling face of the third Hawkeye in Hada Kakashi's mind now revealed a chilling coldness. For a moment, Kakashi broke out in a cold sweat, and fear appeared in his eyes. Root. As the gloomy Root base approached, Shimura Danzo, seeing Kakashi arrive, showed a rare smile on his aged face. However, when Kakashi knelt on one knee and respectfully reported his intelligence mission, he was first surprised, then revealed a look of smugness. So that's it, the third Hawkeye, in his bright light, dismissed you from your Ando position, actually wanting you to join the 7th Division of the Police Department to investigate. Relying on your Sharingan, and also the unique nature of the 7th Division of the Police Department. At this moment, Danzo revealed a smiling expression, inwardly mocking the third Hawkeye for being too clever and getting himself into trouble. Today, he had finally won against this old sorry once. Kakashi, the Uchiha clan is inherently the most evil, and the Ninetales being controlled by the Sharingan is an undeniable fact. I hope you can infiltrate the police force for the sake of Konoha. It must be said that Shimura Danzo's mind works incredibly quickly. In an instant, he figured out how to maximize the benefits. If Kakashi continues to maintain a clandestine relationship with him and infiltrates the police force, it will only benefit him. Firstly, he will gain another pair of eyes within the Uchiha clan, and with Kakashi possessing the Sharingan, he will find it easier to gather intelligence on the Uchiha than others. Secondly, Kakashi, while outwardly appearing to remain under the third Hokage's command, had actually shifted his allegiance to him. It could be said that he didn't need to expend much effort to acquire a double agent. The Uchiha clan's police force gained one more spy, and the third Hokage's subordinates also gained one more spy. This time, he seemed to have put himself in the position of a chess player, and Shimura Danzo immediately showed a satisfied smile. When Hada Kakashi bowed his head, his 3-Tamo Sharingan was revealed. Now, his eyes were filled with determination. He absolutely had to uncover the truth of what happened all those years ago, to find out whether the third Hokage existed or not. All for the sake of reclaiming his position. Yes, Lord Danzo. Kakashi, secretly the third Hokage of the Anbu, is actually a root member, and outwardly he wants to join the police force. This kind of multifaceted espionage is extremely dangerous, but at this moment he remains indifferent. His own life and death have probably long since become unimportant to him. Hokage's office. With the third Hokage's pipe in his mouth, puffing and inhaling a pungent cloud of smoke, he listened to the report from below and coldly said, "You're saying Kakashi went to Root tonight?" At that moment, an Ando member knelt on one knee in the office and respectfully reported in a low voice, "Yes, Hokage-sama, this evening Kakashi encountered Lord Danzo at the Memorial Stone." Kakashi then secretly infiltrated Root at night. "Because it's Root, I didn't dare risk going in." Upon hearing the Anbu's report, the third Hokage's eyes gleamed with a sharp light, and he said in a low voice, "Good, let's pretend nothing happened. Just observe what Kakashi is doing lately. Your intuition is excellent, but don't take risks. Especially since Kakashi is with the Anbu, you need to keep a close eye on what kind of information he's looking for." "Yes," Anbu respectfully replied, while the third Hokage displayed a confident, all-controlling smile. Danzo, do you really think you're the one pulling the strings?" "I am. You're still too naive." This Anbu member possesses the most exceptional perceptive abilities in existence, and it is precisely because of this that he has the confidence to intently observe and firmly grasp Kakashi. Danzo, isn't your confidence based on those few things?" At this moment, the third Hokage revealed a relieved smile. Although Danzo was difficult to deal with, as long as he was under his watchful eye, there was nothing that couldn't be resolved. Danzo manipulated Kakashi, preventing him from attacking him with those few external incidents. He only needed to secretly investigate what information Kakashi was gathering in the shadows, and then he would have a way to deal with him. Counterplot. The most brilliant counter-espionage strategy isn't about them trying to persuade the other party, but about the person involved personally investigating and uncovering the truth, of course. This truth is something they want the other party to see. For a moment, the third Hokage revealed a smile. Kakashi was truly a sharp blade. The police department? Root. Thinking of this, he couldn't help but laugh. At this moment, Kakashi was unaware that he had become the target of so many conflicting opinions, and similarly, even Uchiha Yoru was unaware that Kakashi would attract so much attention. Following the news of his battle with Kakashi that night, which somehow spread, Uchiha Yoru is now considered a genius ninja in Konoha, on par with the genius Kakashi. Now, Uchiha Yoru's position as the head of this police squad is legitimate and well-deserved. Regardless of the aspect, even in terms of strength, he has earned the respect of others. Naka no Jinja. Clan leader, elders, in the past few days, quite a few people have joined the squad on Saturday. Even Hada, Kakashi, and Guy have joined. At this moment, Uchiha Yoruichi calmly spoke about the affairs of the 7th Squad of the Police Department without the slightest hint of arrogance, which was what pleased the clan head and the elders. Kakashi and Madogai joined the police force, and others assumed that Madogai joined because he was thinking of his good friend Kakashi. Uchiha Fugaku's stiff expression softened, revealing a hint of relief as he nodded and said, "Yoru, although the 7th Squad's forces are now established, you still need to be careful. The 7th Squad is now exposed to everyone's eyes, and who knows how many people from various factions are involved. Especially with the recent additions, Madogai and Kakashi, you need to wholeheartedly try to win them over, but you also need to be wary because Kakashi came from the Anbu. As for the genius ninja Hada Kakashi, the entire Konoha knew about it, and even Uchiha Fugaku had to admit his talent." The elder beside him nodded slightly in agreement. Hada Kakashi might be an Anbu spy, or he might genuinely be recovering from war-related injuries, but you must know his family name. At this point, the elder couldn't help but lower his voice slightly, making his expression clear. The Haddock surname hasn't been removed yet, and the White Fang's prestige still remains. If you can capture Kakashi, then the White Fang's former prestige will shift to Orochimaru. Furthermore, the Uchiha clan and Haddock also had a close relationship that year. Otherwise, how could this Sharingan have fallen so easily into Haddock Kakashi's hands without any harm? Upon hearing the elder's account, Uchiha Yoru's expression immediately turned serious. He hadn't expected this connection. Were the Uchiha clan and the Haddock clan related back then? He even secretly observed the elder before him, wondering if it was also the same as now, where the Uchiha initially placed their baits on Haddock. Seemingly sensing Uchiha Yoru's gaze, the elder immediately shook his head and said, "You don't need to think too much about it. The power of White Fang was beyond your imagination. Even Sarutobi, at his peak, couldn't contain White Fang's influence. White Fang proved himself to be the next Hokage with his own strength. Not only the Uchiha clan, but countless noble families in the village extended olive branches to him. White Fang, a legendary ninja of the same era as the Sannin, was also a force that overshadowed the Sannin. Initially, he was dismissed by the 3rd Hokage without making any mistakes, and was practically the successor to the next Hokage. The title of legendary ninja is not at all an exaggeration. Even Uchiha Fugaku, standing beside him, couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. No one had ever imagined that such a ninja would meet such a tragic end. Police headquarters, training ground. Break, break, break. All that could be seen was the training ground where Uchiha Yoru and Hada Kakashi were constantly flying up and down, exchanging blows. Kakashi still hadn't completely given up using his swordsmanship. Kakashi's Enbu-style longsword gleamed with a cold light, inheriting the White Fang's exceptionally sharp swordsmanship, while Uchiha Yoru held a cross-cutting sword. Neither of them, without any chakra transformation, engaged in a purely taijutsu and swordsmanship duel. The sound of weapons clashing echoed incessantly in their ears, and the two men's punches and kicks never stopped, relentlessly attacking. By this time, both were slightly out of breath. When the two separated after a single blow, Hada Kakashi was panting heavily, secretly lamenting his opponent's pained expression. His limbs were trembling and aching. The opponent's strength was truly immense. His exquisite swordsmanship, coupled with his extraordinary physique, meant he was not only incredibly fast, but also incredibly strong. He was facing what was essentially a humanoid beast. Haha, Kakashi, your Sharingan usage is becoming even more proficient. You're almost on par with our Uchiha clan now. At this moment, Uchiha Yoru saw Kakashi secretly waving his tired hand, and he immediately smiled and waved his hand, signaling that it was time to end the day. Although they were clearly the same age, Uchiha Yoru's development was distinctly different from that of ordinary people. He developed in a robust direction, his entire body filled with strong, powerful muscles, yet without the slightest hint of clumsiness. Notably, his height at this age had already reached 1.8 meters. 15-year-old Kakashi was now a teenager, already over 1.7 meters tall, but compared to Uchiha Yoru, he was still a bit short. Oh, Kakashi, today we're going to have a duel between young men of that caliber. Seeing the two finish their discussion, Madogai immediately rushed forward enthusiastically, familiarly giving them a thumbs-up gesture, along with his dazzling white teeth. Seeing this, Uchiha Yoru couldn't help but smile, waving his hand to change the subject. Kakashi, although your Sharingan usage is more proficient than before, you are not Uchiha after all. Not being able to deactivate the Sharingan constantly depletes your chakra. Today is just the right time for our appointment with teacher Orochimaru. Upon hearing Orochimaru's name, a glint of light flashed in Kakashi's eyes, but his expression remained indifferent as he nodded and said, "Thank you." Now, for the usually cold Kakashi to even utter the words "thank you" was a genuine expression of gratitude. If it weren't for Uchiha Yoru providing him with the Uchiha clan's experience in using the Sharingan, this three-tamo Sharingan left behind by Obito wouldn't have been able to be used so proficiently so quickly. Haha, Kakashi, we're classmates, and we can even entrust our backs to each other as companions. Uchiha Yoru laughed casually, but these words caused Kakashi's already icy heart to tremble once again. Comrades! His hand pulled a blindfold over his left eye, using this action as if to conceal his inner turmoil and even a growing sense of guilt. Guy, Kakashi can't go on patrol with you today either. At this moment, Uchiha Yoruichi, with a sincere and cheerful expression, turned her head and waved her hand at Madogai, chuckling softly. Seeing this, Madogai enthusiastically shouted, "Yoru, don't worry. Just take Kakashi to see Lord Orochimaru. With Madogai on patrol this time, absolutely nothing will go wrong." Of the three, only Madogai was genuinely excited. Kakashi's Sharingan was a burden to him. On their first day joining the police force, Uchiha Yoru smiled and told them that he had already spoken to Professor Orochimaru about it and would come up with a solution in a few days. Isn't this news about Kakashi being delivered today? Guy is genuinely happy for Kakashi, and also happy that he didn't have any strength left to help him tonight. Kakashi, however, harbored complex emotions, but his face remained calm as he nodded and followed behind Uchiha Yoru. At this moment, Uchiha Yoruichi's deputy, with a relieved smile, sincerely treated the two. But inwardly she was calculating, Madogai might be Kakashi disguised as someone who had joined the police force, but coming to his territory wouldn't be so easy. What does Kakashi cherish most? His comrades. Hada Kakashi is currently experiencing the darkest moment in his life. In the original Anbo arc, Kakashi even believed Danzo's words and secretly leaked information about the third Hokage. Although he eventually repented, a careful reflection reveals the shady dealings. Kakashi secretly examined the documents. How did the third Hokage know all this so coincidentally? He even managed to extract the contents of the confidential documents, and yet he was so accurate. One possibility is that Kakashi had already begun a covert investigation, but his tracks were discovered. The person who sought his investigation was someone who wanted to investigate a would-release experiment plan, which the third Hokage happened to uncover. Or rather, what Kakashi saw was what the third Hokage wanted him to see, and similarly, he would make Kakashi see what he wanted the other person to see. The outskirts of the Forest of Death. Hada Kakashi, with one eye revealing a hint of indifference, followed them to this place. Upon reaching a large cave entrance shaped like a snake's head, he suddenly glanced at this unique cave entrance with a touch of curiosity. Yoru, what is this cave entrance? Upon hearing Kakashi's questioning tone, Uchiha Yoru casually waved his hand and chuckled, saying, "This is Orochimaru's experimental base. You're not an outsider." Turning his head casually, Uchiha Yoru suddenly noticed Kakashi's gaze seemingly fixed on the uniquely shaped cave entrance with a hint of curiosity. He couldn't help but shake his head and say, "Orochimaru-sensei, like you, is proficient in all 5 elements." Among the 5 elemental ninjutsu, the earth element is the most familiar. This is merely a small technique for controlling chakra. Although Uchiha Yoru spoke casually, the look in Kakashi's indifferent eyes seemed to reveal a hint of contemplation, and at that moment, his heart stirred. Even Uchiha Yoru observed Kakashi with a strange look in his eyes. Could it be that Kakashi's earth release technique, the dog-headed sable, was inspired by Orochimaru? In the original story, Anbu Kakashi, while pursuing and investigating Orochimaru's ninja experimental base, naturally encountered all sorts of strange underground headquarters. Chakra control. At this moment, Hada Kakashi seemed lost in thought, muttering to himself, even showing a look of sudden understanding. He even fell into deep contemplation, thinking that if Earth attribute ninjutsu could arbitrarily sculpt animal shapes, perhaps this was a method for training chakra control. Indeed, he lives up to his reputation as a Sannin. Even the mere design of a cave entrance gave him profound insights. Meanwhile, Uchiha Yoru, walking ahead, shook his head as he watched Kakashi's thoughtful expression, muttering to himself, "Earth release, a dog-headed idiot. This must be a habit from years of practicing ninjutsu." However, he also felt that this was a method for training chakra control, not limited to earth attribute, because as the saying goes, mastering one method leads to mastering all methods. The underground research facility was gloomy, but unlike what one might imagine, it wasn't damp at all. Instead, it was dry and bright, though there were quite a few winding, serpentine passageways. With a creak, the main door of the research lab slowly swung open, revealing a group of masked medical ninjas busily working. But at that moment, a figure blocked the approaching person. "Lord Yoru, the person behind you needs to sign a confidentiality agreement." A masked bodyguard respectfully approached the newcomers, extending his arm to stop them. Uchiha Yoru smiled and nodded, saying, "Good. Kakashi, come and sign the confidentiality agreement." Signing a confidentiality agreement, this is only enforced when entering a secret village base or participating in a secret meeting. Hada Kakashi was secretly shocked by this scene. This was actually a research base within a secret village. Although he was on a mission, he knew even more that if this were truly a confidential operation, he absolutely wouldn't have been allowed in. Therefore, this place definitely belonged to the village's research base and was legitimate and legal. If it were confidential, let alone whether he could come or not, even if he could come, he wouldn't sign a confidentiality agreement. Jonin are entitled to participate in various confidential matters within the village, and under certain circumstances. They may gain access to certain confidential bases after signing a confidentiality agreement. Good. Hada Kakashi respectfully accepted the pen and scroll, and after signing his name, he left his personal seal before allowing him to enter. Kakashi, Orochimaru's teacher, is now assigned to Root. You've been with the Anbu, so you should know that. Therefore, I won't say much more. Uchiha Yoru led Kakashi inside, simultaneously revealing a relaxed smile, as if they were close friends. Kakashi, deeply mindful of his mission, feigned a look of bewilderment and coldly asked, "So what is this place for?" Facing Kakashi's questioning, Uchiha Yoru gave an apologetic smile and waved his hand, saying, "The research is confidential and cannot be disclosed, but the rest isn't classified, so I can tell you. This place is primarily responsible for researching and cultivating limbs and organs, making the techniques for limb and organ transplantation more mature, even to the point of achieving self-cultivation goals. In this way, there would be no need to physically harm those death row prisoners or spies. In the Jonin era, limb and organ transplants were no longer a secret. After all, it would be a great pity if a Jonin were to lose a hand or an organ in battle, directly ceasing to fight and reducing their numbers. Conversely, if you find someone with similar chakra who doesn't exhibit any organ rejection and whose limbs are perfectly normal, most spies, traitors, and death row prisoners will end up like that. Even during wartime, enemy ninja prisoners will be targeted. After all, cutting off their flesh to nourish one's own side, anyone would do that. However, these are all unspoken rules agreed upon by the 5 great nations of the shinobi world, and they will not be openly discussed. As for the remaining smaller nations, very few can achieve this level of technology. Hada Kakashi gazed at the dizzying chaos in the base. Everywhere were Petra dishes, containing arms, thighs, even hearts and other organs, as if some kind of cruel cultivation experiment was taking place there. Yoru, what are you doing here? At this moment, Hada Kakashi was somewhat silent, as if he sensed that the other party wanted to drag him down with them. After all, although he was a pure ninja, his mind wasn't stupid. How could he not see that the recent actions of the 7th Squad were a signal Orochimaru was sending to the village, a signal of Orochimaru's political agenda? Kakashi's demeanor was naturally noticed by Uchiha Yoru, who immediately showed an apologetic smile. After looking around and finding no one paying attention to them, he slowed his pace as they walked side by side, whispering softly in Kakashi's ear. Kakashi, there's no way around it. If you don't suppress your Sharingan, it will constantly drain your chakra. Under these circumstances, without adapting to the Sharingan, you're practically useless. Even if you do adapt, your future training will be affected. Kakashi has a Sharingan that automatically consumes chakra every hour and every minute. Under these circumstances, he is almost unable to concentrate on training. It can be said that Kakashi's training direction now is practically focused on only one thing: control. A genius, because of the involvement of a single Sharingan, will be dragged into the abyss. Especially at this age, which is the peak period for every ninja to mature, Kakashi's progress with the Sharingan was almost at a standstill. Seeing Uchiha Yoru's apologetic smile, Kakashi's long dormant heart swelled with warmth, and he couldn't help but lower his head and say in a low voice, Yoru, thank you. Haha, Kakashi, rest assured, I won't put you in an awkward position. Once your eye problem is solved, you won't have to worry about anything else. Uchiha Yoruichi, in the manner of her old classmate, smiled and nodded, as if to say that although their time at school was short, they still shared fond memories. But Kakashi felt a growing sense of guilt. He had never shown mercy to his enemies, not even fellow rogue ninjas from his own village, yet this time he wanted to exploit his own comrades. At first, Kakashi thought his old classmate was about to drag him down to join Orochimaru's faction, but there were some things he could still see through. One reason is his title, Haddock. 8 years later, the White Fang's reputation still remains, especially since he became a Jonin at the age of 12. These intangible things and connections might not mean much to ordinary ninjas, but they are very important to politicians. The second one was also a genius ninja from Konoha, a 12-year-old Jonin, enough to attract a considerable number of young ninjas. The White Fang's reputation, the 4th Hokage's student, and the fact that he himself is a genius ninja, these 3 factors combined represent an invisible political accumulation. Whoever acquires Kakashi will receive these 3 political investments. Therefore, Kakashi thought that Uchiha Yoru wanted to drag him down with her, but judging from appearances, that didn't seem to be the case. Wait a moment, don't say anything, leave everything to me. Rest assured, Teacher Orochimaru's chest won't be small enough to fit a chicken's intestines. Uchiha Yoru smiled and winked at him, as if to say, let's get the benefits first, you don't need to worry about anything else. However, in Kakashi's eyes, this scene conveyed a feeling that the other party didn't want him to be dragged into this messy situation. Hada Kakashi joined the 7th Squad, which on the surface was partly for self-improvement and partly as a form of political investment, but like in Izuka and Aburame, it was just ordinary political investment. However, the Uchiha and Hyuga clans were somewhat different. They had already directly challenged Orochimaru, clearly stating their position. Therefore, in Kakashi's eyes, Uchiha Yoru seemed unwilling to completely drag him into this mess, and it was precisely because of this that Kakashi felt even more ashamed. The room was brightly lit, and upon entering, Kakashi was immediately greeted by a strong smell of alcohol and disinfectant, causing him to frown inwardly. It was clear that this brightly lit room was frequently used for some kind of experiment. Orochimaru, the teacher. In the room, only Orochimaru was present, staring at the test tube in front of him, seemingly observing and recording some kind of transformation. After Uchiha's words yesterday, he nodded slightly without looking back. Yoru, have Kakashi lie down first. Kakashi, who had already prepared himself in bed, bowed respectfully and said, Yes, Lord Orochimaru. The title of Sannin, one could say, held prestige second only to the Hokage within the village. Even the 6 department ministers treated Sannin with utmost respect, because Sannin proved through their strength that they all possessed power comparable to Cage level. Kakashi lay on the chair. His right eye, visible only from view, seemed somewhat empty and indifferent as he gazed at the room illuminated by the white fluorescent lights, while secretly observing his surroundings. A full hour later, Orochimaru finally put down the documents in his hand, turned his head to look at Kakashi, who had been waiting for a long time, and couldn't help but reveal that hoarse smile he had just heard. Haha, the 3-Tamo Sharingan is truly a valuable research subject. Orochimaru's evil tone and smiling face could easily be misinterpreted, and Kakashi couldn't help but frown upon hearing it. He might be indifferent to his own life now, but to this eye, it was an existence even more important than life itself. Teacher Orochimaru, your laughter could easily lead to misunderstandings. At this moment, Uchiha Yoru shrugged and smiled, and the two of them approached Kakashi. At a signal from the night sky, Kakashi slowly opened his forehead protector, revealing the 3-Tamo Sharingan that could never be closed. Orochimaru's evil, greedy eyes seemed to be admiring some rare treasure, but only those familiar with the situation knew that Orochimaru was purely observing a novel object for research. At this time, Orochimaru was arrogant, although his bloodline limit was very powerful. It hadn't completely overwhelmed him, because the 3-Tamo and the Mangekyo Sharingan were incomparable. Uchiha Yoru's hands manifested green chakra, a healing jutsu, and then he placed it on Kakashi's eyeball, saying, although the transplant surgery was very rough at the time, after further treatment, it is now connected to all the nerves. The Sharingan has now become one with Kakashi. At this point, Uchiha Yoru truthfully reported Kakashi's situation, and Orochimaru, after listening, gently nodded, without a bloodline ability, and instead possessing the Sharingan. This is a conflict between physical constitution and bloodline ability, so the body cannot control the Sharingan's activation and deactivation like the Uchiha clan's instincts. With his extensive experience, Orochimaru directly explained Kakashi's current situation, then shook his head and said, this kind of situation isn't unprecedented. The village has long since conducted research on bloodline transplantation experiments. After briefly examining Kakashi's Sharingan, Orochimaru lost interest and casually waved his hand, saying, Yoru, your suggestion is quite good. We can use sealing techniques to seal this Sharingan, and when needed, we can simply unseal it. With a glance downwards, Uchiha Yoru smiled and nodded, removing Kakashi's headband. At that moment, Orochimaru formed a hand seal, and instantly, purple, tangible chakra flames appeared on his 5 fingers. The 5 elements sealing technique. Chakra concentrated in his 5 fingers, instantly imprinting around Kakashi's left eye. In an instant, a bizarre black sealing pattern appeared, and at the same time Kakashi, struggling to suppress his physical discomfort, watched as his left eye's super strong vision gradually blurred and then slowly lost its light. The 3 Magatama stones seemed to have lost their vitality in the same way. Kakashi's left eye slowly closed with exhaustion, and a small black 5 elements seal pattern appeared on his eyelid. Many people know the 5 elements sealing technique, but those who can precisely control the sealing technique to a specific part of a person's body are extremely rare. From this, one can see just how terrifying Orochimaru's control over chakra is. This is a sealing talisman, considered the key to the 5 elements seal. Normally, this seal will block most of the chakra flow in the left eye, leaving only the active chakra in the eyeball. Similar to hibernation, when needed, you can simply unseal it according to the seal technique. A common yellow sealing talisman appeared in his hand, and Uchiha Yoro immediately broke into a smile. It worked. After all, in the original story, even the Hidden Mist Village ninjas could use sealing talismans to suppress the Byakugan, so a 3-Tamo Sharingan shouldn't be a problem either. After all, it was Orochimaru who was taking action. Kakashi, covering his left eye, felt as if a valve had opened, but he was powerless to control it. As the burning sensation subsided, the chakra in his left eye, which had been continuously draining every moment, instantly seemed to close like a valve, shutting off. Or rather, leaving only a glimmer of chakra. Sensing the changes in his body, Hada Kakashi got out of bed and respectfully nodded to Orochimaru, saying, "Thank you, Lord Orochimaru." Looking at Kakashi, Orochimaru, with a mischievous grin, licked his lower lip and said, "Kakashi, you're quite something. A born ninja with all 5 attributes? If you wish, you can come work for me. Welcome." What Orochimaru appreciated most was genius, especially Kakashi, who at 12 years old had already become a jonin. He was confident that, under his tutelage, Kakashi would absolutely become an outstanding ninja of Konoha. However, when faced with Orochimaru's invitation, Kakashi bowed his head in silence, not saying a word. After all, he was the 4th Hokage's student, and throwing Orochimaru away now would represent a completely different meaning. Haha, Yoru, although you can only take things step by step in your research, I have to say that your thinking is the most outstanding that I've ever seen from a teacher. Orochimaru wasn't angry with Kakashi either. Instead, he turned to look at Uchiha Yoru with a satisfied smile. His research might need an assistant, but sometimes a few ingenious ideas are the most crucial thing. Without these wondrous and imaginative ideas, how could he have opened up another, unknown avenue of thought? Haha, using sealing techniques to suppress bloodline jutsu, this method is feasible, but extremely difficult. One reason is that the bloodline is precious. Another is that there is no rejection by the user. And the final point is that the user must have sufficient and precise chakra control. Orochimaru's satisfied smile faded, unaware that his disciple also relied on foresight to learn these things. For example, the Hidden Mist Village ninjas relied on this method to use the Byakugan. So why couldn't Kakashi? After his eyes were properly treated, and he wouldn't even be dragged along anymore, Kakashi looked at his classmate with gratitude. Perhaps he didn't realize it himself, but their relationship had become even closer. Dense in the forest, a snake-like shape outside the cave entrance. Kakashi, this is the 5 elements sealing technique scroll. After all, your eyes can't always be a nuisance to others. It's best to rely on yourself. Looking at the jutsu scroll that Uchiha Yoru handed him, Kakashi hesitated. Although sealing techniques were a rare and specialized skill, they were still a treasure in every village. The 5 elements seal, rank of super advanced forbidden jutsu. Kakashi wasn't unaware of the preciousness of this jutsu. Seeing Kakashi hesitate, Uchiha Yoru shook his head and chuckled, saying, "Kakashi, rest assured, this is given to you in my personal name. If you feel awkward accepting it, just say so." At that moment, Uchiha Yoru's fingers caressed his posture, causing Kakashi's moved expression to suddenly freeze, revealing a speechless look. He was still the familiar old classmate. Initially, even though he only spent less than a year at school, Uchiha Yoru's name was practically legendary, especially his money-grabbing tactics, which were all too familiar. Good. Kakashi wasn't one to beat around the bush. After taking the jutsu scroll, he felt even more ashamed. Some jutsu techniques couldn't be bought with money. He knew that all of this was because the other party didn't want him to feel deprived of human kindness, wanting him to feel at ease and comfortable. But the more this was the case, the more ashamed he felt. Watching Kakashi's retreating figure, Uchiha Yoru also smiled, but this smile revealed a hint of hidden meaning. Deep in the jungle, a small snake's head flicked its fangs, slowly slithering along, while a figure lurked silently within the woods. The one who had come and gone was Kakashi. Underground research base. Haha, it seems like a little worm has come from outside. At that moment, Orochimaru seemed to sense something, immediately revealing a smile that was both genuine and even licking his lips, while Uchiha Yoru, upon hearing this, merely shrugged and shook his head with a chuckle. "I'm only worried about Kakashi." Seeing Uchiha Yoru's confident tone, Orochimaru showed a curious expression. He seemed somewhat intrigued by this matter. Why was his disciple so certain it was Kakashi? But Uchiha Yoro just smiled without saying anything and shrugged his shoulders. He certainly couldn't have revealed that he had analyzed the information based on his knowledge of the original work. Kakashi, a perfectly good Anbu, wouldn't do anything like that. If you say there's no ghost involved, then I don't believe it. After all, in the original story, the third Hokage used Kakashi for 10 years straight. How could he possibly not use him even if he was perfectly fine? There was something fishy about this in itself, even though Maidogai's covert participation in the 7th Division made it seem perfectly reasonable. But it was precisely this seemingly reasonable arrangement that made him feel uneasy. Maidougai had no reason to doubt him, only fearing he might be being manipulated by someone with ulterior motives. But Kakashi was a different case, giving him reason to suspect that Kakashi was a spy sent by the third Hokage. Teacher Orochimaru, this research base should be thoroughly investigated by the other party. After all, organ transplantation and cultivation techniques are classified information within the village, and Root's mission doesn't violate any rules. For so-called research, they absolutely had to keep it so well hidden. In the end, if it really exploded, none of them could avoid being implicated. The best solution was to use this kind of beneficial ninja technique. Some elite ninjas secretly knew about it, but they all kept it a secret and didn't reveal it. Haha, it seems like Yijun is growing up so fast. He's getting more and more like a politician. Orochimaru, with a hoarse voice and a forced smile, looked at his disciple. Not only had his strength progressed rapidly since his eyes were opened, but he was also extremely adept at political maneuvering, suggesting that the Uchiha clan had contributed significantly to his success. For Uchiha Yoro, he was quite satisfied. After all, he needed such an assistant. Although he couldn't exert himself on human subjects for experiments, he was still very good in other aspects. Lord Orochimaru, these are the latest test results. At that moment, Yakushi Kabuto, nearly 13 years old, appeared beside Orochimaru, respectfully pushing down his glasses and handing over the data report in his hand. Looking at Yakushi Kabuto, and then at Uchiha Yoro beside him, Orochimaru immediately displayed a satisfied smile. Haha, Night Lord, the Yakushi Kabuto you introduced is a genius no less talented than Kakashi, especially in medical ninjutsu. His talent is outstanding. Facing Orochimaru's encouragement, Yakushi Kabuto humbly bowed his head and gave a fake smile, saying, Lord Orochimaru is too kind. In the original story, Orochimaru considered Yakushi Kabuto and Kakashi to be on the same level, which shows Yakushi Kabuto's potential. Although still young, Yakushi Kabuto's talent in medical ninjutsu has already become apparent, much to Orochimaru's delight. He now completely regards Yakushi Kabuto as a test subject and training assistant. In the original story, Kakashi spent most of his time in the Dark Ages neglecting his training, and similarly, Yakushi Kabuto, due to his years of espionage, needed to be extremely cautious and also neglected his training. Now, it seems both of them have returned to the same starting point. It would be great if I could help teacher Orochimaru. Uchiha Yoro smiled and nodded. Yakushi Kabuto was still immature, but it was clear Orochimaru was very pleased. One was a training assistant for his experiments, another was capable of independently shouldering responsibilities and acting as his political assistant, and finally, Anko would inherit his ninjutsu later. Right now, Orochimaru is absolutely at his most opportune moment, even if the village is currently hiding him in the snow. Even the seemingly ordinary Mitarashi Anko actually possesses extraordinary talent. Otherwise, she wouldn't have caught Orochimaru's attention right after graduation. Furthermore, Anko was younger than them, yet she was able to be in the same class as them, which shows her talent. However, her later years were wasted due to various reasons. Ultimately, in Orochimaru's eyes, only genius and talent catch his attention. How could vulgar and fake possibly enter his snake-eyed gaze? Teacher Orochimaru, this is the budget for this month. When Orochimaru took out a sealed scroll from inside his sleeve and handed it over, he revealed a satisfied smile. Haha, Night Lord's abilities are becoming more and more outstanding. Uchiha Yoro used his title to achieve his own power and self-serving ambitions. This point has never been concealed, and Orochimaru naturally understood it, but he didn't stop him. Instead, revealing a satisfied smile, he needs funding for his research, to the point of using his position for personal gain. Aren't there already enough teachers in the Sarutobi clan for him? Teacher Orochimaru, the thing I've been encountering in my training lately? Following Yakushi Kabuto, who was respectfully busy recording various data, Uchiha Yoro took this opportunity to talk about the problems he had encountered in his training, as well as his doubts about various ninjutsu. Orochimaru truly lives up to his reputation as a genuine ninjutsu doctor. I feel like even Sarutobi, this doctor, can't compare to the real Orochimaru. In his eyes, he understands everything about training, especially in ninjutsu research and invention. In the entire shinobi world, except for the second Hokage, it feels like no one can compare to Orochimaru. The more Uchiha Yoro explained his thoughts on various ninjutsu techniques, the more surprised Orochimaru became, and he couldn't help but nod repeatedly. Haha, Night Lord, your insights into ninjutsu are really impressive. You actually came up with this method. Orochimaru was impressed, thinking that even though Jiraiya had taken Namikaze Minato as a disciple who could practice Hiraishin no Jutsu, he himself was no less capable. Vomiting. The classic scene was repeated. Orochimaru's throat moved downwards, and a scroll slowly emerged from his mouth, still sticky with saliva. But Uchiha Yoro showed no disgust whatsoever, excitedly catching it and shaking off the mucus with a single motion. Ninjutsu scrolls, dirty? Ask anyone outside, not to mention slime. Even if they're covered in all sorts of disgusting things, they'd be willing to lick them just to take a look. A scroll with the character lightning fell into his hand. Orochimaru licked his lips, his voice hoarse as he chuckled. This is my compiled materials on lightning. Release. Carefully examine it. It will definitely help your so-called research on the Chidori series of ninjutsu, especially your idea of utilizing nature. It's quite interesting. Thank you, Teacher Orochimaru. At this moment, Uchiha Yoro was truly grateful from the bottom of his heart. With such a teacher, what was the point of all this hard work? He already had Chidori, and he also had the thought processes for the other two pillars of ninjutsu. He could certainly research and invent them himself, but it would be such a waste of time. It would be better to just tell Orochimaru about it. Using Orochimaru's obsession with ninjutsu to his advantage was like unlocking a supercharger for him, directly propelling him to the next level. In these jutsu techniques, it can be said that Orochimaru exerted his effort and he provided the ideas, but the final result was almost entirely his own and perfectly executed. Thinking of this, Uchiha Yoro's respect for Orochimaru was further amplified by a radiant smile. This was truly a worthy mentor. Konoha. Following the Ninetales rampage, the border village gradually calmed down, and Konoha seemed to return to a time of peace, radiating a vibrant and lively atmosphere everywhere. The police force was stationed in a training ground surrounded by dense jungle, where the sounds of bodies and weapons clashing echoed incessantly. Inside the training ground, Mitarashi Anko was panting heavily, her forehead covered in sweat, her fishing net outfit soaked through. She was gasping for fresh air, her mouth wide open. Yoru, how did you make such great progress? Opposite them was Uchiha Yoro, whose relaxed and cheerful expression was evident. After their discussion, it was clear that Mitarashi Anko was quickly becoming exhausted, while he remained radiant. Anko, it's not that I've made great progress, but your training seems to have become a little lax lately. Instructor Orochimaru specifically sent me to supervise you. Seeing Mitarashi Anko's breathless appearance, Uchiha Yoro's smile deepened. This was perfect assistance. Orochimaru and the old Konoha factions would inevitably clash politically, and the person caught in the crossfire would undoubtedly be affected significantly. Orochimaru departed, simultaneously declaring the collapse of his political power structure. Anko bore the brunt of the false influence, a genius thus lost. Since Orochimaru left, Mitarashi Anko doesn't seem to have matured much. In fact, she still uses the ninjutsu that Orochimaru taught her. This shows why she's been here for so many years. With careful precautions, Orochimaru's failure was inevitable, but he didn't want a disastrous defeat like in the original story that would directly lead to an avalanche of power. He wanted to use his current status to receive his teacher's legacy before the avalanche. Otherwise, his own status would also be affected. Oh, stop it, Teacher Orochimaru, and you are always talking nonsense every day. I don't know what you're researching. It was clear that Orochimaru's recent unpredictable behavior had left Anko somewhat dissatisfied, her pouting further revealing her displeasure. Seeing this, Uchiha Yoru's smile widened. Anko is still very innocent at the moment, and perhaps that's something he likes about her. Anko, Orochimaru's instructor, has said that you must train with me every day starting today. Of course, you can be lazy too. At this point, a mischievous glint appeared in Uchiha Yoru's eyes as he teased, "Yes, it's just like my disciple Itachi. Although he's only 6 years old, his progress is remarkable. Even if he's not as good as Kakashi, he'll graduate soon." Mitarashi Anko was simply naive because she was protected by Orochimaru's faction and hadn't experienced the warmth and coldness of human relationships. Seeing Uchiha Yoru's teasing demeanor, Mitarashi Anko immediately waved her hand dismissively, saying, "All right, that's a clumsy attempt at provocation." "I know, I'll definitely train properly." Anko clearly displayed a defensive tone, but Uchiha Yoru merely smiled, shook his head slowly, took out a scroll, and placed it directly on her. Anko cast a questioning glance downwards, but Uchiha Yoru just smiled and shook his head, saying, "Orochimaru-sensei has devised a training plan for you. Whether you follow it or not is up to you." It must be said that Orochimaru, although now obsessed with research, is absolutely a responsible and good teacher. He is never stingy with training plans and ninjutsu. Opening the scroll and seeing the meticulously detailed training plan Orochimaru had devised for her, Mitarashi Anko immediately showed an excited expression, almost like she was going crazy. She proudly lifted her head and said, "Don't worry, you only made such great progress thanks to your Sharingan, right? I'll definitely catch up." A young lady, but a genius, Mitarashi Anko. At this moment, Mitarashi Anko displayed an arrogant demeanor, seemingly possessing the aura of a genius from her younger days. To catch Orochimaru's eye, Mitarashi Anko's talent was undeniable. With her abundant chakra and innate talent for learning ninjutsu, Anko is absolutely a genius. Our ancestors had a good saying, "The art of politics is to make many friends and few enemies." No one is foolish enough to offend everyone and put themselves in a situation where they are surrounded on all sides. In the original story, the Uchiha clan had no friends, and he didn't want the Uchiha to repeat that mistake. His current strategy was to use Orochimaru's influence to forge friends for the Uchiha, at the very least preventing them from becoming enemies like in the original story. "Anko-sama, you must train hard." Instructor Orochimaru said that these 3 years are your physical development period. If you seize this opportunity, you might be able to become a jonin. Anko was still young and naive at that age, and especially at that age of idol worship, Orochimaru was completely his idol, and the power of an idol was immense. Uchiha Yoru's words to Orochimaru certainly filled Mitarashi Anko with fighting spirit. Normally, the golden age for ninjas is between 13 and 16 years old, a period of rapid growth in both physical and chakra development. During this time, those with the means will diligently hone their skills. Once you fail to seize the golden opportunity during your growth period, your strength will enter a period of stagnation. This is why, in the original story, Kakashi, Yui Kurenai, and Anko, who were clearly considered genius ninjas, all ended up with such a flat and uneven transformation. Kakashi's Sharingan was a contributing factor, resulting in insufficient power later in life. Yui Kurenai and Anko, one having experienced the pain of losing her father and the other being betrayed and fled by Orochimaru, naturally missed this golden period of development. From the original story, it's clear that the 12 Konoha Genin all graduated at the age of 12, passed the Chunin exam, and 3 years later, in Shippuden, almost all of them reached the Jonin rank. Among the 12 little strongs, excluding the protagonist, their talents are not bad, but Yui Kurenai and Anko are also not far behind. However, it is clear that their growth rate is not as fast as these other little strongs. There are various reasons. One is missing out on the golden period of development, followed by Orochimaru's betrayal and escape, leading to turmoil on the border, leaving no time to devote oneself to training. The Water Country War only came to a close after Shisui returned to Konoha, marking the end of the Uchiha clan's previous conflict. Anko, Orochimaru-sensei's training plan is very clear. You should focus on chakra training. His Chunin techniques primarily use snake-type ninjutsu, with fire-type ninjutsu as a secondary technique. For Anko, this was his natural source of energy, and he couldn't just stand by and watch it go to waste. Uchiha Yoru chuckled softly, but Anko arrogantly lifted her head and said, "Uchiha, great genius, just wait and see. I will prove to Professor Orochimaru that I, Anko, am the real genius. Seeing Anko's proud and straightforward personality, Uchiha Yuru smiled. Time was running out, and he needed to have sufficient political leverage when things unfolded, otherwise he would only become a discarded pawn, unable to change anything. At that moment, a glint of light flashed in Uchiha Yuru's eyes as he looked into the forest behind him, a slow smile forming on his lips. In the dense forest, in the shadows, Shisui slowly emerged, standing atop a towering tree. Uchiha Yuru coldly gazed at Mitarashi Anko, who was continuously training in the distance. Yes, boss, this is the preliminary investigation result. At this moment, Shisui's mood was clearly a little low, even his smile seemed somewhat forced. After quickly glancing through the intelligence scroll that Shisui handed her, Uchiha Yuru almost couldn't contain herself, staring wide-eyed at Shisui's investigation report. Shisui, what is this? Uchiha Yuru could hardly believe it. Even the village's generals were eating in a way that was a bit excessive. Shisui, clearly shaken, forced a strained smile and said, "Yes, boss, preliminary investigation shows that the 7th squad of detectives, including agents from the Anbu route and intelligence agencies, has 23 members." What kind of detective? Shisui's words were still subtle. This was clearly a spy sent to keep an eye on them. What is this all about? Do you distrust the Uchiha? Or do you still not trust Orochimaru? Seeing Shisui's forced smile, Uchiha Yuru felt this was a good opportunity, so he immediately put on a resolute expression and solemnly stared into Uchiha Shisui's eyes. Shisui, this is just the village wanting to know what we're doing. Don't take it too seriously. You must trust the Hokage. At this moment, Uchiha Yuru seemed to be suppressing his grief, holding it all deep within his heart to comfort his loved one. At this moment, Uchiha Shisui felt a little weary. Brother, you've done so much for the clan and the village. Yet the village doesn't trust us, doesn't trust Lord Orochimaru. Shisui felt a pang of sadness for both his older brother, Knight, and Lord Orochimaru. Being suspected by the village was the most heartbreaking thing of all. However, Uchiha Yuru adopted a solemn demeanor. Shisui, let's stop here. There's no need for further investigation. Just remember, Teacher Orochimaru will change everything that's rotten. Rotten. Upon hearing those two words, Shisui's heart trembled slightly, but he couldn't help but admit that perhaps the village was indeed somewhat corrupt to treat Lord Orochimaru in such a way. Yes, big brother, rest assured, we will definitely persevere until Lord Orochimaru puts on the Hokage's hat. At this point, Uchiha Shisui had placed all his hopes on Orochimaru, yearning for the new Hokage to wipe away the decay of the previous era. Meanwhile, Uchiha Yuru also wore a cheerful expression, which in Shisui's eyes was a smile of hope for the village's future. But he was unaware of the calculations his older brother Yuru was making in his heart. Seeing that Shisui had now placed all his hopes on Orochimaru, his plan was already half successful. In the palm of his hand, lightning flickered, and the intelligence scroll Shisui had painstakingly investigated turned to ashes in his eyes. After all this, Uchiha Yuru stepped forward, patted him on the shoulder, and comforted him, saying, "Shisui, just do your job as a police officer. As for the rest, there's Teacher Orochimaru. Once Teacher becomes the 5th Hokage, everything will be fine." At this moment, Uchiha Yuru was like a fearless person pushing forward, carrying countless pressures on his back. This made Shisui want to say something to comfort him, but he didn't know what to say. Uchiha Shisui, as seen throughout the original story, possesses immense fighting power, but is also someone who tends to place his hopes on others, a typical example of an evasive personality. From initially placing their hopes on the 3rd Hokage, when those hopes were shattered, they then placed their hopes on Uchiha Itachi, who chose suicide, a choice that was essentially an escape. Just then, a commotion suddenly came from afar. Shisui quickly composed himself, respectfully nodded, and said, "Yes, big brother, I'll go down now. Let's go." Watching Shisui's retreating figure, Uchiha Yuru narrowed his eyes. The village chief's actions were truly disgraceful. Root, Anbu, even the intelligence agency dared to meddle. This 7th division of the police department had indeed been infiltrated like a sieve. These guys are quickly turning into spies. Force won't solve the problem. At most, they'll be dealt with openly, but their covert activities will only deepen. A spy. Uchiha Yuru sneered coldly, intending to show everyone what it means to use someone else's own methods against them. Swoosh swoosh! Through the trees, shadows of figures drifted down, carried along by a fluttering leaf, and Yui Kurenai appeared beside her. The two calmly gazed at each other. Her long, slightly curled black hair and calm red eyes gazed at the other person. At this moment, Yui Kurenai wasn't gentle like she usually was at class reunions. Instead, she possessed an intelligent and beautiful aura, especially those eyes, which resembled red agate, revealing a sense of composure. Kurenai, it's been a long time. Uchiha Yoru's lips curved into a slight smile as he gestured with his hand, while Yui Kurenai calmly and gently nodded. Yoru, you must know that you're being watched. Facing Yui Kurenai's warning, Uchiha Yoru smiled and shook his head, saying the third Hokage, or an Anbu. Facing the questioning gaze, Yui Kurenai revealed a rare side of herself, her expression one of aloofness. Her Kurenai eyes were calm as she stared intently at Uchiha Yoru, who slowly turned his head away. The two stood calmly side by side, gazing at the distant training ground. Yoru, even back in the ninja academy, your eyes clearly showed greed. I once thought you were just materialistic, but now I realize I underestimated you. The Uchiha clan pushed you down at the reception desk, but you were also pushed down by a barrage of arrows. Yui Kurenai calmly explained everything, while Uchiha Yoru revealed a cheerful expression. After all, how many ninjas are fools? Especially women, who are naturally more mature than men psychologically. Rest assured, Kurenai, your worries won't come true. Once Master Orochimaru becomes the 5th Hokage, I will be the Hokage's personal disciple, and the Uchiha crisis will be resolved in my hands. Uchiha Yoru wore a confident smile on her face, while Yui Kurenai, standing beside her, couldn't help but sigh softly. Although she didn't understand politics, she clearly knew one thing: political maneuvering had never been that simple. I hope so. At that moment, Yui Kurenai was also silently praying in his heart, hoping that everything would go smoothly. Turning his head to look at Yui Kurenai's exquisite face, he showed a smile, but a hint of shame flashed in his eyes. I'm sorry, I didn't mean to deceive you. I just didn't want to cause you so much worrying. However, Kurenai, you've come here carrying some kind of mission on your back. Trying to change the subject, Uchiha Yoru directly extended his hand, making a gesture that was characteristic of a gesture, causing Yui Kurenai, who was standing beside him thinking he was going to hold her hand, to freeze. After hearing this, Yui Kurenai glared at her ex-boyfriend, displeased. Are you still joking? The Hokage is secretly investigating the Nine Tails right now. Humph, don't even mention the Hokage. Even we Uchiha clan are doing our utmost to investigate. At this moment, Uchiha Yoru put on a resolute expression. Although he knew who the culprit behind the Ninetales rampage was, this matter was truly impossible to wash away. It seemed that because of Orochimaru, no one was thinking about the future anymore. Therefore, considering the current situation in the village, and knowing that Orochimaru was the only suitable candidate, Yui Kurenai gradually relaxed, sighing dejectedly, Yoru. I hope the village can enjoy eternal peace. There will be a day like that. Uchiha Nightheart's smiling face concealed a cold laugh. What a fine third Hokage! His tactics are truly endless, one after another. First, they secretly arranged for Gekko Hayate and Utsugi Yuga to wait for spies, then Kakashi and Mike Guy. And now Yui Kurenai. It's truly an open covert operation involving countless schemes. In other words, Yui Kurenai was just a pawn, a cover for Kakashi, and even Mato Guy was a cover for Kakashi's existence. All of this was orchestrated by the third Hokage. If I didn't know that in the original story, Kakashi only left the Anbu at the very beginning of the plot, I would have seriously doubted my own existence because of the methods I'm seeing. In the original story, Kakashi was in the Anbu for so long. How could he not know about the third Hokage's injury? How is that possible? But it's not like he would normally spend that much time in the Anbu. The current outcome is also due to Asume and Mato Guy, who are classmates, pleading for mercy together. Although Asuma's presence played a role in this, the third Hokage's subsequent agreement was essentially killing two birds with one stone. One reason is that my son is pleading for you, and the other is that I care about you. Then Kakashi and Mato Guy joined the police force, which already raised some suspicion. Now, with the appearance of Yui Kurenai, what do you call this? This is called misinterpreting things. Kurenai's appearance disrupted people's thinking, covering up for the real spy, Kakashi. Firstly, judging by the person's personality, they would have a moment of realization and a clear understanding of the situation. They misunderstood Kakashi. Kakashi was truly brought here by Madoka to find a relaxing job. Moreover, this circle is one on top of another, with Yui Kurenai, Madoka, Kakashi, and the ambush spies all unaware of each other's identities. It could be said that if any one side is exposed, it will create the illusion that those with the right mindset are lowering their guard. The third Hokage's ruthless tactics truly live up to his reputation as the longest-serving Hokage. Under the moonlight, the 7th Police Department's office flickered with a gloomy glow. At that moment, a ninja in a black cloak stealthily crept closer, carefully observing the surroundings to make sure no one was around. He then slowly opened a drawer in the office and took out the file that was tucked at the very bottom. From observing them over the past few days, it seemed that as soon as this file arrived, Uchiha Yura became unusually nervous, and Kakashi, dressed in his nighttime attire, was even more serious as he slowly opened the file bag. He took this risk by coming here first because Uchiha Yura had become unusually anxious ever since obtaining this information. He couldn't wait any longer. He feared he would lose the opportunity to obtain this intelligence. When the file was opened, it was a scroll, not the usual paper document found in files. But as Kakashi opened the scroll, he narrowed his eyes, and the corner of his mouth, hidden behind his mask, subtly bit the flashlight. All that could be seen on the scroll was the personnel records of the 7th Police Division, along with various logistical details, both valuable and trivial. While this material was precious, it shouldn't have caused Uchiha Yura to feel so anxious. Sealing Jutsu. Is this the only sealing jutsu the Uchiha clan has ever used? Kakashi simply lifted the left eye of his mask, simultaneously performing a hand seal, and the seal was instantly broken, revealing a bright red Toritamo Sharingan that was constantly spinning. The Uchiha clan only possessed sealing techniques. Only those with the Sharingan could see the information. As his Sharingan opened, a completely different style of writing appeared on the scroll within his field of vision. Upon seeing the true information through his Sharingan, Kakashi couldn't help but show a shocked expression. How is this possible? But at that very moment, a flash of cold light streaked across, and in an instant, Kakashi hastily dodged. In the darkness, the blade cut through, and Kakashi quickly released his grip. Immediately afterward, a footprint emerged from the shadows, attacking him, and he quickly used both arms to block. The bodies collided and sank silently for a moment. Then a small flashlight spun down from the air, its gloomy beam of light dancing wildly and illuminating the scene inside the office in the eyes of the two people. A pair of Toritamo Sharingan eyes rotated downwards, staring intently at the opponent, while one hand clutched a small knife. It was Uchiha Shisui, who at this moment could not believe his eyes as he looked at the intruder before him. The mask had been ripped off by his recent attack, revealing a Toritamo Sharingan. Kakashi and the other man met in the gloomy office. Bricks rumbling, the scroll following the two fighting individuals fell to the ground on the sliding track, then rolled down, simultaneously revealing its contents to the two men. Their keen eyesight and copying abilities allowed them to instantly read the entire scroll. Kakashi. At this moment, Shisui's face was grim as he glared intensely at the other party. Although he had long suspected that the other party was likely an ambush spy, when he actually discovered that the other party had stolen intelligence, he still couldn't help but feel sorrow and anger. Why? Why did the third Hokage distrust the Uchiha so much? Distrust Lord Orochimaru? Ultimately, in Shisui's heart, the police force now wasn't just under the control of the Uchiha, but also belonged to Orochimaru's faction. Seeing his exposure, Kakashi's expression also became somewhat serious and frightening. Just as he was about to flee, the window suddenly shattered, and a flash of lightning streaked across. Taken completely by surprise, Kakashi let out a cry of pain. He saw a flashing, lightning-infused blade pierce directly into his shoulder. A burst of electrical energy followed by paralysis of his body. He was completely unable to use his chakra. Yoru, yes, big brother. Shisui was startled, but Uchiha Yoru's expression turned grim and terrifying as he glared at Kakashi, his voice hoarse as he said, "Kakashi, we're classmates. I trusted you. Why would you do this?" At this moment, Uchiha Yoruichi, betrayed and unable to believe her eyes, glared intensely at the other party. However, Kakashi's body was paralyzed and he was unable to resist. Adding to this was the shame in his heart, causing him to fall silent and slowly lower his head, seemingly awaiting judgment. The sword of the grass world was slowly drawn from his shoulder. At this moment, Kakashi's face was ashen and his whole body was still paralyzed, while Uchiha Yoru coldly turned his head and glared intensely at Uchiha Shisui. "Shisui, what are you doing in the office?" A cold voice echoed through the office, leaving Uchiha Shisui speechless. He couldn't have simply arrived and discovered Kakashi stealing intelligence. He had come here to gather information himself. Because, for the past 3 days, Uchiha Yoru has practically locked himself in his office. Although he's hiding it well, he's noticed that his older brother seems a little nervous and out of sorts. Knock knock, footsteps echoed in the gloomy office. Uchiha Yoru slowly sheathed the grass world sword in his hand, walked over to the scroll that had fallen to the ground earlier, his Magatama Sharingan staring intently at it, and then, under the astonished gaze of Kakashi and Shisui, slowly stepped onto it. Chi-chi, with a flash of electric arc from his foot, the scroll instantly shattered and burned to ashes. Having done all this, Uchiha Yoru turned his head and coldly stared at the two men, creating a suffocating and terrifying atmosphere. Kakashi stole intelligence, and Uchiha Shisui also wanted to gather intelligence, but the two of them encountered a common enemy. You've all seen it. A hoarse, low voice echoed through the office. Facing Uchiha Yoru's gaze, Kakashi bowed his head in silence, perhaps inwardly acknowledging the torment of betraying his comrade. Shisui, even more so, lowered his head in shame. The atmosphere became stifling. Uchiha Yoru slowly walked to the desk, slowly opened and closed the drawer, and looked at the two people with their heads bowed low, only revealing a pair of bright red eyes shrouded in darkness. Kakashi, I don't care about your purpose, nor do I care who sent you, but if you dare utter a single word tonight after witnessing everything, I will show no mercy. At this point, Uchiha Yoru's gaze also fell upon Shisui, and at this moment, his crimson Sharingan revealed a murderous intent. This intelligence has never been verified. Its enemy spy provocatively spreading this information. If it's leaked and causes chaos in the village, for the sake of the village, for the sake of Konoha, I won't care who you are. Even if you include my comrades, my clansmen, even my family. In an instant, Uchiha Yoru's figure transformed into a blur, and with a kick, Shisui cried out in pain. His body was sent flying, crashing into Kakashi, and the two of them slammed against the wall. At this moment, a pair of bright red Magatama Sharingan eyes rapidly rotated downwards, flashing with intense killing intent. While facing them were a pair of 3-Tamo Sharingan and a single 3-Tamo Sharingan, an extremely asymmetrical scene, yet it was truly happening. The two groaned as they collided against the wall, the office wall cracking under their weight. At this moment, Uchiha Yoru held nothing back, his eyes blazing with murderous intent as he glared at them, enunciating each word, "For the village. For Konoha, I will mercilessly sever this bond." Beneath the veil of night, the village of leaves exuded an atmosphere of peace. In the 7th Police Department's office, moonlight streamed in, revealing a somewhat disorderly scene, and 3 figures were visible. Is the intelligence fake? Is it an enemy plot to sow discord? Then why? At this moment, Kakashi was deeply consumed by self-reproach. The fierce killing intent emanating from Uchiha Yoru's pair of 2 Magatamas kept swirling in his mind. He knew that if he dared to reveal this information, the other party would likely try to kill him. If this is true, at that moment, Kakashi considered a certain possibility, and his eyes immediately showed a look of fear and urgency. In the eyes of the third Hokage, Danzo was a terrorist and a schemer, but recent documents suggest that Danzo was also a ruthless individual who, while enduring boundless oppression from the oppressed Uchiha, shouldered the responsibility of protecting Konoha's safety. Protecting Konoha, is this the responsibility of the police department? Kakashi muttered to himself, as if he remembered the declaration when he first joined the police department. The department everywhere displayed its determination to protect Konoha, to protect the village. This seemed to be the very responsibility of the police department. Is this the real Uchiha? Kakashi gave a wry smile. The Uchiha protecting Konoha seemed somewhat ironic, but that was exactly what he had experienced firsthand. Arrogance, strong self-esteem, haughtiness, and delusional self-importance, these are all Uchiha personality traits, But what he actually perceives are the hidden face beneath these characteristics. The third Hokage was a schemer, Danzo was a ruthless man, and the Uchiha were connected to the Nine-Tails rebellion. At this moment, Kakashi's mind was in turmoil, and he even had a deep sense of estrangement. Konoha. This peaceful and warm village doesn't seem as good as he imagined. Beneath the surface lies endless darkness. The Nine-Tails is controlled by the Sharingan, and Root is secretly collecting Sharingan. Could it be? Suddenly, a certain possibility crossed Kakashi's mind, and his eyes were filled with deep fear, as if he were suffocating. Touching his left Sharingan, Kakashi was filled with fear. The Nine-Tails is controlled by the Sharingan, but the Sharingan isn't something only the Uchiha can control, is it? If Root Danzo truly collected the Sharingan, then another suspicious clue to the Nine-Tails rebellion would be added. Root is part of the Hokage faction. Did the third Hokage know about this? What role did he play in all of this? Kakashi's gaze was complex as he looked at his classmate. At this moment, he didn't even notice that the paralyzing sensation of the lightning attribute was gradually disappearing from his body as time passed. Similarly, Uchiha Shisui was also unable to remain calm. At this moment, Shisui's three-tamo Sharingan spun wildly in its eye sockets, but ultimately stopped there. In the police office, bathed in moonlight, Uchiha Night God sat calmly in his chair. Yes, boss. At this moment, Shisui wanted to say something, but ultimately didn't know how to begin. Uchiha Yoru calmly looked at the two of them sitting upright in their chairs and said indifferently, "Let's pretend tonight's events never happened. Forget about tonight. Shisui, you are still my clan, and Kakashi, I will still consider you a comrade. Even on the battlefield, I will still confidently leave my back to you." Slowly closing her eyes, Uchiha Yoru sat in her office chair, seemingly enjoying the moonlight, but in the eyes of the two people present, this scene was actually the result of all the training and hard work she had put in. The intelligence report regarding the three-tamo Sharingan indicated that its super powerful vision and copying abilities allow them to deeply engrave the information into their minds. At this moment, Uchiha Nightheart secretly breathed a sigh of relief. After waiting for 3 full days, the fish had finally taken the bait. He had originally thought of catching Kakashi, but unexpectedly, he also had this unexpected catch, Shisui. He deliberately concealed in his office a very simple piece of intelligence, information about the Uchiha clan's 3 wars up to the present day, including intelligence about the unexpected deaths of Uchiha clan members, some of whom even appeared to have deliberately blinded themselves before dying in battle. There are all sorts of clues, both real and unreal, circulating within the Anbu village, suggesting that Root is secretly plotting to collect the Sharingan. So far, there are suspicions that approximately 6 pairs of three-tamo Sharingan have been lost. These are all true, but whether or not there are clues proving they are Root or Anbu, these clues were added by him. But similarly, he knows that what he added is also true. Thinking about trying to manipulate people? No. Thinking about bringing Kakashi into your team, the most important thing is that you absolutely must not fake it, because fakes will always be exposed one day. In the original story, when did Danzo begin implanting the Sharingan? This isn't explicitly stated, but based on a few intelligence analyses, Danzo definitely had the implant before the genocide. Firstly, when Kakashi was in the Anbu, Danzo ordered Yamato to retrieve Kakashi's Sharingan. Secondly, when Danzo stole Shisui's right eye, he used the Forbidden's Jutsu Izanagi. From this, it can be inferred that Danzo had already obtained the Sharingan's power before the Uchiha clan's annihilation, and the transplanted arm was Orochimaru's masterpiece. Shortly after the annihilation, Itachi joined the Akatsuki, and after Orochimaru's defeat, he became obsessed with the Sharingan. At that time, how could Orochimaru have been so kind as to do these things for Danzo? Therefore, it can be inferred that Danzo's Sharingan arm transplant was done before Orochimaru betrayed and fled. Yoru. At this moment, Kakashi covered the wound on his shoulder, his eyes filled with complex emotions as he looked at his former classmate. But seeing the atmosphere like this, he silently used a body flicker technique to leave the office, the next black dot in the night sky continuously leaping away. With only the two of them left in the office, Shisui's expression turned serious as he said in a low voice, "Yes, big brother, my clan is Uchiha. I am a member of the Uchiha, and I have the right to know all of this." At this point, Shisui felt an even greater sense of shame. as if all the darkness had been carried forward by his elder brother, while he, with only his own strength, knew nothing at all. Yes, big brother, I'm counting on you. I'm also an Uchiha. Finally, Uchiha Shisui solemnly and directly performed an extremely proper and respectful bow, requesting to be seated. Shisui lowered his head, as if he couldn't hear the voice he wanted, as if he couldn't raise his voice. Seeing Shisui's stubbornness, Uchiha Yoru's seemingly calm expression slowly faded, and finally, a weak sigh filled with weariness rose in the gloomy office. Shisui, you must remember, the Uchiha clan is glorious. Konoha was founded by the Uchiha and Senju clans. Now that the Senju clans are gone, the Uchiha clan must shoulder the responsibility of protecting Konoha. At this moment, Uchiha Yoru's face was filled with determination, as if saying, Shisui, your thinking is a bit narrow-minded. How can you only care about your clan? Upon hearing this, Shisui was suddenly startled and secretly reproached himself. That's right, when did his thinking become so narrow-minded? He only thought of himself as an Uchiha, forgetting about the village. Thinking about gradually changing someone's long-held beliefs isn't easy, and Uchiha Yoru never considered destroying other people's beliefs. Instead of destroying each other's beliefs, it's better to change those vague beliefs into his own before the other person's beliefs become unclear. At this time, Shisui was completely unaware that his beliefs were gradually changing. In his heart, the obsession of protecting Konoha by the Uchiha clan became even more steadfast, and unconsciously, he began to see Konoha as the very entity that founded the Uchiha clan. The village is Uchiha. The room was dimly lit inside. Shisui, the intelligence you just saw is true. At this point, Uchiha Yoru stood up and said in a low voice, but as for whether it was done by the Anbu or root in the village, I think it's false. That's absolutely impossible. But at this moment, Uchiha Shisui, upon hearing this, slowly raised his head and looked at his elder brother, Knight, whose eyes were hidden in the shadows. For the first time, a sense of defiance surged within him. Brother, do you think I'll believe that? Uchiha Shisui slowly stood up, his gaze fixed on Uchiha Yoru, and spoke each word in a deep voice. I am Uchiha Shisui, a genius of the Uchiha clan, an elite jonin of the village. I am not a child. Big brother Yoru, do you think you can protect me forever? How long can you protect me then? A similar psychological contradiction flickered in Shisui's eyes, filled with resentment and anger. He admired his elder brother, Yi, who always carried an ugly darkness on his back, a burden he never wanted him to know, and even less did he want him to bear. Instead, he wanted him to become the envied genius of the family. But you should know that he is an elite jonin, and judging by his ninja strength, he believes he can keep this secret and even help his older brother. Brother, you can't carry so much on your back alone. I want to help you. Help you carry all this darkness on your back. At this moment, Shisui's resolute expression was very much like that of a younger brother who wanted to help his older brother. He didn't want to be powerless to help his older brother with only his own strength. Seeing Shisui's resolute expression, Uchiha Night God's heart trembled slightly, then he lowered his head and said in a hoarse, low voice, Shisui. The hidden village not only used the first Hokage's cells for human experiments, but also conducted human experiments on the Uchiha Sharingan. In an instant, Shisui's expression showed disbelief, his pupils instantly turning bright red, and 3 black Magatama spheres briefly appeared. As Uchiha Yoru uttered these words, it was as if all his strength had drained from his body. He slumped listlessly into his chair, his eyes vacant and lifeless, and began muttering to himself. The founders of Konoha, the Senju and Uchiha, have now become rare research materials within the village's research lab. How ridiculous! Even more ridiculous is that this is a top-secret research mission that Professor Orochimaru received from the village. When this was said, Shisui found it hard to believe. The Senju and Uchiha clans founded Konoha and protected everyone, yet these people were turning against them, wanting to oppose them. If someone else had said this, he absolutely wouldn't have believed it, but the person was none other than Brother Yi himself. Even more importantly, Brother Yi was also a disciple of Lord Orochimaru. This is a top-secret S-rank mission, and the first successful test subject was Shimura Danzo. Danzo's right eye was tested with the Sharingan. It seems that Professor Orochimaru is secretly experimenting with using the first Hokage's cells to suppress the Sharingan, but there's no specific success yet. At this point, Uchiha Yoruichi closed her eyes in a pained expression, as if saying she didn't know. No one can research their own clan's bloodline without getting angry. Shimura Danzu, the first Hokage's Sharingan inhibiting cells. At this moment, Shisui was completely overwhelmed by this news, as if this were a dream spoken of by the celestial beings. Suddenly, Konoha, which was once so peaceful, had so many secrets. He felt like a complete fool. Yes, big brother, the village is researching the first Hokage's cells and the Sharingan, but what exactly do they want to do with them? At this moment, Uchiha Shisui, after the initial shock, was filled with intense anger, truly infuriating. The Senju and Uchiha founded Konoha protecting everyone. Why would this happen? For Shisui, his greatest pride was Konoha, the strongest ninja village founded by the Uchiha and Senju clans. But what was it doing now? Betrayal. Utter betrayal. An unprecedented feeling of betrayal welled up inside Shisui, his eyes turning bloodshot and filled with murderous intent. At that moment, Uchiha Yoru slowly activated his Sharingan. Song Magatama was rapidly spinning downwards, and in Shisui's eyes, it directly evolved into the Three-Tama state. At this moment, Uchiha Night God's expression revealed a sinister ferocity as he glared at Shisui, his voice hoarse as he uttered each word. Shisui, remember, your clan is Uchiha. The village was founded by the Uchiha. If this news were to spread at this time, do you know what kind of upheaval it would cause? Let me tell you, the Uchiha clan is completely at odds with the Hokage's faction, even to the point of internal conflict. If that happens, Konoha will be devastated, and this could even be the trigger for the Fourth Great Ninja War. How many casualties will the village suffer then? 3 wars have just ended. Do you really want to plunge the village into war again? After a moment, Uchiha Yoru stared directly into Shisui's eyes, speaking each word in a deep voice. Shisui, the body flicker user, I know you are powerful. But if you become a criminal, I will personally kill you. Uchiha Yoru's final words resonated even more powerfully. At this moment, he was completely a person willing to sacrifice everything for the village's peace and security. When Shisui heard that it would cause for battles, he suddenly snapped back to reality. And looking at Uchiha Yoru's warning, a warm feeling of shame welled up in his heart. Despite being an elite jonin of the Uchiha clan, Shisui had always lived under his older brother's protection. Now that he finally understood the perilous situation his older brother was in, he almost doubted him. Yes, big brother, you can rest assured. At this point, Shisui completely regarded the village as belonging to the Uchiha clan. Although he had faced betrayal, he absolutely did not want to see war break out. At this moment, Uchiha Shisui finally understood everything, realizing that the intelligence his elder brother had been desperately concealing was actually related to the trigger that would ignite the Fourth Great Ninja War. No wonder his elder brother had been acting so strangely. Meanwhile, outside the office, in the darkness of the night, when I revealed an expression of utter shock. So, what are you planning to do, brother ya? Knowing everything, Uchiha Shisui's expression turned serious. He wanted to know the next plan. He wanted to help his older brother even more, not have him bear all of this alone. Seeing Shisui's questioning look, he suddenly glanced out the window. Upon sensing the chakra he had left outside, he spontaneously decided to put on this little show in front of Shisui. On stage, everything was real, nothing was fake. It was just some information he had deduced based on his knowledge of the plot. But Shisui and Kakashi, who were outside the window, would know that everything he said was true once they secretly investigated further. So, for the sake of the village, he didn't want to start a war. In his heart, Konoha was founded by the Senju and Uchiha clans, so naturally, they were the rightful owners of this place. Now that the Senju clan was in decline, it was naturally the Uchiha clan who belonged to them. So everything is true. It's just that he's a little worried because of Shisui and Kakashi. Uchiha Yoru muttered to himself, because he was serious about the Uchiha clan. The police department is in the office. When Shisui inquired about his plans, Uchiha Yoru's eyes revealed a clear ambition and desire, staring intently at Shisui without the slightest hesitation. Shisui, when the Uchiha clan brings overwhelming power to help Teacher Orochimaru ascend to the position of 5th Hokage, then I will personally speak with Teacher Orochimaru. secretly ordering him to end the first Hokage's research on would release cells and Sharingan. If there's still no way to prevent the dethroning of the corrupt third Hokage and his high-ranking officials, then my target will be the sixth Hokage. At this moment, Uchiha Yoru seemed to be a shining presence in the darkest night, and under the moonlight illuminating the office, Uchiha Shisui's eyes flickered with a strange light. The sixth Hokage. When Uchiha Yoru becomes the sixth Hokage, he can directly issue an order to ban these ugly studies, sealing Konoha's ugliness into the dust of history. At this moment, Uchiha Yoru was so great in Shisui's eyes that, unconsciously, Shisui even transferred a portion of his hopes and expectations from Orochimaru onto Uchiha Yoru. Yes, big brother, rest assured, I will become your most steadfast tool. At that moment, Shisui seemed to find life in the same kind of light, his expression solemn and resolute as he spoke, while Uchiha Yoru, after hearing him, showed a relieved smile on his serious face. In Shisui's astonished gaze, he uttered a sentence that strengthened his belief. No, Shisui, you're not a tool. You're a trusted companion I can rely on. Companion. Bond. This world seems to exist without any escape, but for those who have been treated as tools for ninja training since childhood, perhaps this is the most precious thing in the world. When Shisui heard this, a sincere and earnest smile appeared on his face, but then, seeing this somewhat messy office, his expression suddenly stiffened, and he instinctively assumed the role of becoming the right-hand man of his older brother, Yi. Yes, boss, Kakashi just saw this intelligence report. Do you want it? As Uchiha Shisui spoke these words, a murderous glint flickered in his eyes, as if to say, Brother Yi, if you just nod your head, I'll handle these matters myself. Upon hearing this, Uchiha Yoru showed a weary expression, silently shaking his head weakly and saying, Shisui, Kakashi is from the Hada clan, and even a descendant of Lord White Fang. He knows the seriousness of the situation and wouldn't do something like that. Furthermore, at this point, Uchiha Knight's tone suddenly paused. Then he revealed a carefree smile. Kakashi is also a comrade I approve of. Lord White Fang is a hero of Konoha and Kakashi is also a hero of the village. I believe in Kakashi. At that moment, the figure outside the window heard these words, and an inexplicable tremor ran through their heart. A warm feeling slowly welled up inside them. A hero! At this moment, the two pairs of three-tamo Sharingan eyes in the police office simultaneously revealed expressions of determination, while outside the window, a three-tamo Sharingan seemed to have made some kind of firm decision. Under the moonlight, Konoha's scenery exudes an enchanting aura. Standing tall on the rooftop of the Uchiha compound, Yoru gazed intently at the moonlit night, inwardly sneering. Sarutobi Hiruzen, I've withstood all your moves, but I hope you can withstand my counterattack. Using White Fang to instigate Kakashi, he rejected that idea from the very beginning. Konoha's White Fang and the cold-blooded Orochimaru are remarkably similar. Both have countless achievements, both are currently considered top contenders, and both have faced blows stemming from their reputations. The results are similar, but their fates are different. White Fang, facing backlash from fame, chose to commit suicide by disembowelment. Similarly, after facing a blow to his reputation, Orochimaru's heart turned to ashes. He severed all ties, chose betrayal and flight, and lived his entire life solely for immortality. They all faced similar situations, a significant decline in prestige, and they all encountered betrayal at the expense of their own confidence. In the Hokage village, the stable high-ranking officials, faced with political interests, achieved the same result. Host, Uchiha Yoru 3 Tamo, Chakra level, Jonin 1.3 miscellaneous. Chakra attributes, Fire Leave 4, Lightning Leave 5, Earth LV3 Swordsmanship Tactics, LV5. Healing Ninjutsu LV4, looking at his own attribute panel, Uchiha Yoru revealed a smile, yet also a hint of heartache. A 3-tamo Sharingan worth 10 million yen. But luckily, he had built a sufficiently substantial stage for himself tonight. Right in front of Shisui and Kakashi, he had completely transformed into a 3-tamo Sharingan through a certain mental stimulus. He didn't care what others thought. He only needed Kakashi and Shisui to know. Having no other choice, having temporarily joined Shisui, he could only make the decisive choice of adding more acts to the cast. Fortunately, the audience he spent 10 million on the acting and the resulting performances were of sufficient caliber. During this period, he continuously trained, and it must be said that after his physical body was strengthened, his strength improved very quickly. At the same time, his chakra control increased, and his progress in chakra attributes was also quite good. Having just evolved his 3-Tamo Sharingan tonight, this surge of stimulation will bring about a brief period of explosive growth for his body. Hawkage! At this moment, Uchiha Yoru, consumed by a lust for power, gazed at the position of Hawkage Rock, a slow smile forming on his lips, pushing Orochimaru to become the 5th Hawkage. If it were possible, he would naturally want to do so, but unfortunately, this was a failure. Or rather, Orochimaru had already foreseen it, but he was still somewhat unwilling to accept it. He was unwilling to accept Sarutobi abandoning him once again, unwilling to accept Konoha becoming so utterly rotten. Or rather, he wanted to find a reason to convince himself to sever all ties. Eventually, Orochimaru began to harbor thoughts of immortality, viewing the 5th Hokage's choice of position as something to be taken lightly, and decided to wait and see how the village would decide what to do with him. Unfortunately, self-interest blinds the human heart. At this moment, Uchiha Yoru chuckled self-deprecatingly. Having truly spent time with Orochimaru as his teacher, he had to admit that his charisma and personality had earned him great admiration. If Orochimaru were to ascend to the throne, he would likely become the most powerful Hokage in history, and the village's politics wouldn't be shaken too much at that point. At most, the Orochimaru clan would only seek a small benefit. This Hokage then feared that he would devote himself entirely to researching immortality, to the point that power was merely fleeting to him, only immortality was eternal. Unfortunately, he couldn't change any of this. Political struggles have never been about whether you want to or not, but rather about countless forces converging to serve the interests of each individual and group, all of whom are behind the scenes pushing everything forward. The 3rd Hokage, as expected, holds the title of the longest-serving Hokage. In this era, there are no ancient figures to refer to, and the political maneuvering was so skillful. If he didn't know the plot, he would probably have been completely powerless to retaliate in this situation. Uchiha Yoru gazed at the Hokage rock under the moonlight, revealing a captivating smile, and slowly extended her hand as if to grasp the Hokage rock in her grasp. I've already made my move. Now I'll wait for more kunai to fly around, hoping that Sarutobi Hiruzen will be able to catch them later. Konoha, root. Under gloomy circumstances, root, as its name suggests, is built deep underground, with massive pits inside that are interconnected like the roots of a giant tree, interwoven deep within the earth. Lord Denzo, even the Uchiha Yoru Police Department, with utmost care, couldn't find any clues linking them. Hearing Kakashi's report, Shimura Denzo, leaning on his wooden staff, nodded slightly. His single eye revealed a hint of dissatisfaction as he said in a low voice, Kakashi, since there's nothing important and no crucial intelligence, you just need to maintain covert contact with Root. Don't let anyone find out. Denzo was also somewhat dissatisfied in his heart. You say Kakashi didn't find anything, then go to Root and talk about the yarn. At that moment, Kakashi, kneeling on one knee, his left Sharingan flashing with a bright light, bowed his head and said in a low voice, but the 3rd Hokage ordered me to secretly investigate the Uchiha clan within the Uchiha territory, the Uchiha branch, the Uchiha Wind. When Kakashi uttered 3 names in quick succession, Shimura Danzu's eyes suddenly showed a sinister glint. His grip on his staff tightened, and he spoke in a hoarse, low voice, trying to suppress his anxiety. Why does the 3rd Hokage want to investigate these 3 people? Although Kakashi couldn't see Danzo's expression at that moment, he noticed that when the latter heard those 3 names, he tightened his grip on his staff. At that moment, he seemed to have the answer in his heart. Seeing Kakashi kneeling on one knee, he respectfully reported in a low voice, the 3rd Hokage feels that the deaths of these 3 people are somewhat questionable. Although all 3 sacrificed themselves during a mission, they all lost their Sharingan. While it seems like they destroyed themselves before their sacrifice, it is still full of many unanswered questions. Upon hearing Kakashi's report, Shimura Danzu's eyes immediately blazed with anger. Sarutobi, you still claim you didn't plant a spy in Root. Damn it, you're still the same despicable Saru. No wonder you discovered my Root would release ninja. You even tracked down my secret attempt to steal my Sharingan. To say Root doesn't have your people, I wouldn't believe it. At this moment, Danzo was filled with rage. He wished he could return immediately and wipe out Root. Sarutobi had gone too far, but he still managed to restrain himself. Kakashi, the Uchiha clan is inherently the most evil clan, and the Sharingan can control the Ninetales, a calamitous entity, therefore, I need you. At this moment, Shimura Danzu's face revealed a sinister and vicious expression, and at the same time, he began to use his hoarse voice to bewitch Kakashi. Normally, given that the Ninetales rebellion had only recently occurred, it wouldn't be surprising if Kakashi was bewitched, but at least he wouldn't have any objections to Danzo. After all, the Ninetales in the Sharingan was real, and it was natural for the higher echelons to be wary of the Sharingan and want to investigate. Kakashi still had this political awareness of the necessary sacrifices. But first and foremost, Kakashi's consciousness sank, and he was filled with revulsion. He even began to have a terrifying thought. If Danzo and other Konoha high-ranking officials had truly stolen the Sharingan, wouldn't that prove that the Uchiha clan wasn't the only ones capable of controlling the Ninetales? Kakashi, the Uchiha clan is evil. Therefore, I need you to keep a close eye on this most evil clan. At this moment, Shimura Danzu's hoarse voice, filled with an incredibly seductive and captivating power, made Kakashi, kneeling on one knee, seem even more brainwashed. This scene made Danzo even more smug. Sarutobi, you planted spies in my route, so I'll plant spies beside you too, HMPH. From Root to Kakashi, his heart was filled with complex emotions as he looked towards the Hokage's office building. It seemed he wanted to know the truth, yet was also afraid. But in the end, he made up his mind and, with a determined look in his eyes, ran towards the third Hokage's office. Hokage's office. Lord Hokage, the day after tomorrow, Elder Shimura Danzu of Root recently instructed me to secretly investigate the Uchiha clan's three-tamo Sharingan ninja intelligence. When Kakashi changed his approach, he recounted how Shimura Danzu had manipulated him into joining Root on the same day, and how he had secretly investigated the activities of the elite Uchiha with the three-tamo Sharingan. As expected, upon hearing Kakashi's report, the third Hokage Sarutobi Hiruzen, unusually silent, remained in his office, the only sound being the third Hokage's clicking of his tongue and the puffing of his pipe. The strong smell of tobacco lingered in the office until the third Hokage, his pipe still burning, lowered his head and let out a deep sigh, a sigh filled with so much emotion. At the same time, the third Hokage looked at Kakashi, a hint of comfort appearing in his eyes. Kakashi was even more outstanding and loyal than he had imagined. Kakashi, do you know that in the beginning, Konoha had two great masters who controlled the Biju bloodline? At that moment, Kakashi, kneeling on one knee, fell silent, about to reply when the third Hokage, Sarutobi Hiruzen, habitually sighed and began speaking in a melancholic, nostalgic tone. Konoha initially possessed the first Hokages would release and the Uchiha Sharingan, both powerful bloodline abilities used to counter and control Biju. After the first Hokage's death, the village lost the wood release. Later, under the pressure of war, the village was forced to take a desperate gamble and secretly conduct experiments researching wood release. This experiment resulted in immense losses, and subsequently, the village banned such experiments. It's undeniable that the third Hokage's captivating language was incredibly persuasive, almost as if it transported the reader to that perilous, war-torn era, where the village had no choice but to do those things for the sake of peace. Hearing the third Hokage's secret account, Hada Kakashi fell silent. He knew that his future as the sixth Hokage might have been due to luck, but it was absolutely inseparable from his political acumen. Kakashi did possess a certain political mind, though it was still very immature at this point. But Kakashi was able to be clear about a few things. For the sake of peace, some sacrifices were inevitable, even if sacrificing a small part to save a large part was necessary. In such situations, he would make such decisive decisions, like killing Lin. Kakashi has possessed this kind of self-sacrificing political spirit since childhood. It's innate and has nothing to do with his strength. The third Hokage looked at Kakashi's silent demeanor, his face filled with joy. He had originally intended to painstakingly bring Kakashi back to his senses, but he hadn't expected Kakashi's understanding of the will of fire to be so high that he didn't need to exert any effort at all. Kakashi, perhaps the wood release experiment failed, and then this Ninetales formation caused disaster. Danzo, in desperation, wanted to seize the Sharingan, all for the sake of Konoha. At this moment, The third Hokage was filled with reverence, but also inwardly he was furious. Danzo, fine. He secretly conducted research on the Sharingan behind his back. Didn't he know how big a mess this would cause if it came to light? However, Kakashi's beliefs were wavering at this moment, perhaps because of the immediate darkness that enveloped Konoha, which filled him with terror and suffocation. The third Hokage didn't vehemently object, but he used a tone suggesting that he was sacrificing for Konoha's sake when saying all this. If that's the case, it's likely that someone between the third Hokage and Danzo was secretly researching the Sharingan, and that both sides were aware of it. Otherwise, the third Hokage wouldn't have said that. He could understand the research on would release. After all, it was a deceased person. But what about the Sharingan? Throughout the history of the shinobi world, no bloodline clan has ever allowed others to research and inherit their bloodline. Kakashi was sparring with Root and the third Hokage around that time, and although he didn't directly uncover any evidence, the responses from both sides gave him an answer in his heart. The third Hokage and the high-ranking members of Root Danzo both held a fear of the Uchiha clan, and similarly, they were both tolerant and understanding of the Sharingan experiments. Given his understanding of politics, this attitude likely meant they tacitly approved of these clandestine experiments. If we were to say what sets Kakashi apart the most, it would be his deep respect for his comrades. It could be said that Kakashi inherited his father's spirit, considering his comrades as his own life. The village must naturally be more important than his comrades. After all, judging from his killing of Rinkakuzu, it's clear that Kakashi possesses the kind of heroic character. Although Lin chose to die voluntarily, did Kakashi regret it? His greatest regret was not protecting his comrade well enough, and he regretted not being the one to die. But heroes usually have a bottom line in their hearts, and once that bottom line is crossed, the hero's character will absolutely not choose to collude in wrongdoing. This is the difference between a hero and a hero. White Fang and Kakashi are both heroes of Konoha. The first Hokage's experiment on the human body of the wood-release jutsu was understandable. After all, this matter certainly couldn't escape the notice of Lady Tsunade, and the high-ranking officials were all disciples of the second Hokage. Because the so-called disciples were like father and son, outsiders couldn't comment on this matter, let alone the fact that the Senju clan also wanted to control the awakening of the wood-release jutsu. But where is the Sharingan? It would have been fine if the Uchiha clan had simply agreed, but this was done secretly. From the very beginning, the third Hokage's high-ranking officials never considered the Uchiha clan as fellow villagers, which is why they acted so recklessly. Uchiha clan territory. Under the beautiful sunlight, Uchiha Yoruichi sat comfortably in the courtyard, educating Uchiha Itachi. At this moment, he was unaware that, due to his various calculations, Kakashi was investigating the answer in his heart. He had never lied before, but he used a preconceived notion that caused Kakashi's psychological reaction to be completely different. In Kakashi's heart, the Uchiha clan knew about these things, but they all suppressed their feelings, even choosing to endure humiliation for the sake of the village. Yet the higher echelons considered it normal. This was something he could not easily forgive. If the third Hokage and Danzo had discussed this earlier, the effect would have been completely different. Kakashi, although feeling resentful and isolated, could only sigh deeply and choose to ignore it, because it was all for the sake of the village, and after all, the Nine-Tails Sharingan was indeed something to be feared. Human nature. That's the most difficult thing to grasp and control. Even under normal circumstances, it's often possible to change a person's decision. Teacher, isn't ninja about unlocking the body's potential and thus gaining immense power? Why do you, as my teacher, want to emphasize restraint? At nearly 6 years old, Uchiha Itachi's thinking was indeed different from his peers. His early maturity meant he developed these ideas a little too quickly. Seeing Uchiha Itachi's questioning look, Uchiha Yura smiled and nodded, saying, "That's right, Itachi. The strength of a ninja is indeed gained by unlocking the potential of the body, but you must know that although the human body is a treasure, it also has its limits. For example, regarding the limit of your age, your body is still immature. If you overexploit your potential, you might gain immense power in the short term, but it will leave behind wounds that are difficult to heal later." At this moment, Uchiha Yoruichi feigned a cheerful smile in response. His clumsy acting at this moment indeed made Uchiha Itachi frown slightly in suspicion, as if teacher Yoruichi's mood was a little off, as if he was hiding something from him. Curiosity. When a woman develops curiosity about a man, she constantly wants to uncover the truth behind this mystery. The same principle applies to Itachi. Itachi's curiosity was piqued, and he constantly wanted to uncover the truth behind it all. This could create something in his heart, and at that point, the effectiveness of the brainwashing he was secretly doing at school would be reduced by at least half. Furthermore, Itachi frequently trained with Shisui, and when Itachi demonstrated his powerful ninja talent, their friendship would reach a point where Shisui would reveal some secrets. The human heart. One is giving the answer directly from one's own mouth, while the other is arriving at the answer after a long period of investigation. These two processes are two completely different situations for the human heart. A person's mind is limited. Once it absorbs a certain amount of thoughts and feelings, its ability to focus on other matters will be greatly reduced. Itachi, you are still young. If this were wartime, I would make you unleash your full potential at any cost, even if it has repercussions later. At this moment, Uchiha Yoru was completely acting like a responsible teacher, her face beaming with concern as she said, "But now the village is at peace. There are only minor disturbances on the border, nothing serious enough to send you children to the battlefield. So, Itachi, what you need to do now is have a complete childhood. Others may have had a complete childhood, but Itachi could never have. Being born into the Uchiha clan's patriarch's family sealed his destiny. His superior birth also determined the responsibilities he would have to bear. Itachi, at your age, my plan for you is to focus on maintaining restraint in chakra exploration. Don't delve too deeply into it, as that will deplete your body." A genuinely concerned person, considering himself a teacher, Uchiha Yoru chuckled and shook his head. "Your shuriken technique is a genius in the clan. At your age, you can already put more effort into shurikens, and you also have chakra control. Don't push yourself too hard too soon." In the courtyard, Uchiha Yoruichi, the deputy head of the Uchiha clan, was attentively educating the young Itachi. His words came from the heart, without a hint of pretense or insincerity. After all, Itachi hadn't yet become the scoundrel he would become later. Otherwise, he would have long since wanted to kill the other party. Now that he had clearly found a brighter future under his guidance, he naturally had to be mindful of his family. After all, the Uchiha and the Hokage's high-ranking officials would inevitably clash sooner or later, and if he wanted to survive, he could only strengthen his clan along with them. Ultimately, a person's strength is limited, unless they can become so powerful that they can sweep away everything in their path. Looking out the window, Uchiha Mikoto saw Sasuke, over a year old, toddling around inside the room. A gentle smile appeared on her face. Naikun is such a gentle teacher. Sitting upright opposite him, Uchiha Fugaku still wore that deathly, expressionless face, staring blankly at the situation outside, yet calmly saying, "Itachi is a genius. His background dictates that he must shoulder all the burdens." Upon hearing these words, Uchiha Mikoto's eyes revealed a look of unease, and finally, she let out a deep sigh. "Itachi, this child, bears too heavy a responsibility." Uchiha Itachi's life was beyond his control. Born into such a family, he could only be a genius. This isn't Sasuke anymore. Sensing Mikoto's softened heart, Fugaku coldly and sternly looked at Sasuke, who had just learned to walk and was still wobbling. It seemed that between the two choices, the eldest son would have to bear the responsibility in the future, and thus, harshness was unavoidable. As for Sasuke, the second son, he was able to have a relatively complete childhood, a family that the eldest son had to inherit, and thus he also had to bear this burden of responsibility. Sasuke! Looking at the young Sasuke, Uchiha Mikoto revealed a hint of a smile. Of the two sons, only one could be hers, the other had to shoulder the responsibilities he deserved. For some reason, looking at Sasuke, his second son, Fugaku felt a pang of jealousy. He couldn't help but let out a cold snort. Indeed, this second son bore a striking resemblance to the young man outside the courtyard. One might mistake them for father and son. In the room, young Sasuke wobbled down, wanting to approach his father, but Fugaku, seeing Sasuke's familiar hairstyle, immediately gave him a cold stare, scaring young Sasuke into not daring to move forward. Seeing Fugaku's expression growing increasingly grim, Uchiha Mikoto naturally sensed something was amiss. Her face stiffened slightly as she suddenly glanced outside the courtyard, took a deep breath, and spoke in a low, serious tone, Fugaku. How old is Uchiha Sasuke? 2 years ago, Uchiha Yoru was just a 13-year-old child. At this moment, Uchiha Mikoto also looked at her husband with a hint of dissatisfaction, then revealed that same politically charged, fake smile on her face. Come on, Sasuke, let's go with Mom to find Grandpa Shanks to play with. Treat each other with respect. Although it was originally a political marriage alliance, both sides came from prominent families, so naturally they maintained self-restraint. Watching his wife leave with the child, Uchiha Fugaku couldn't help but gaze intently at Uchiha Yoru, who was teaching Itachi outside the courtyard. Perhaps he was being overly sensitive, but Mikoto was also going too far. She learned something bad, repeatedly dressing Sasuke up from a young age to have the exact same hairstyle as him, so that anyone who saw her would think she was little Uchiha Yoru. There's no way, even though Uchiha Yoru's inclination towards Mintai Jutsu developed later, his body matured extremely quickly. Now, not even 16 years old, his body is already that of a 1.8-meter tall ninja. You call him a child? How could a child be that strong? In the courtyard, young Uchiha Itachi, still drenched in sweat from his recent training, his eyes lit up when he saw his mother bringing Sasuke out. Your Majesty! Uchiha Itachi perfectly exemplified the etiquette of a noble family. Although he called her mother, his eyes seemed to gleam with a light as he gazed at young Sasuke. Watching this scene, Uchiha Yoru couldn't help but murmur to himself, could it be that my brother's ability to control this toy is hereditary? Itachi, your training is over for today. Go rest now. Uchiha Yoru, naturally, wouldn't be so oblivious. Upon witnessing this scene, she smiled and nodded, then turned to Uchiha Mikoto and said, sister-in-law. However, the usually gentle and kind Uchiha Mikoto seemed a little off today. Her beautiful eyes revealed a hint of dissatisfaction and distance. Looking at the strong young man before her, and then at the childish Sasuke, Uchiha Mikoto immediately shook her head inwardly. It was truly a terrible mess. She nodded slightly, then began giving orders to Itachi. Itachi, take Sasuke and let's go out for a bit. At this point, Uchiha Mikoto, whose face was so small it was almost imperceptible, seemed to remember something else and subtly furrowed her brow before instructing Itachi, and while you're at it, get your little brother a new hairstyle. Although Uchiha Itachi was mature for his age, he clearly didn't understand the hidden meaning in the words. Instead, he stepped forward and gently hugged Sasuke, saying with a laugh, Mother, I think this hairstyle suits Sasuke very well. At that moment, Uchiha Itachi's thoughts were entirely focused on Sasuke, and he completely failed to notice the stiff expression on his mother's face. At this moment, Uchiha Itachi was filled with happiness. Indeed, the hairstyle he had styled for Sasuke was the most suitable. It seemed as if it perfectly matched even his teachers. Uchiha Mikoto, with a fake smile on her face, took the two children and left. However, before leaving, that fake smile seemed to reveal a hint of dissatisfaction, leaving Uchiha Yoru somewhat puzzled and lost in thought. What aspect of myself am I provoking this clan leader's wife? Could it be because I've only been training Itachi for a short time? Looking ahead, I need to pay even more attention to Itachi. Thinking about it, it's true that while Itachi was the teacher, no one from the Shisui family had yet taken charge of him. Yes, sir. While Uchiha Yoru was silently pondering what was wrong, Uchiha Fugaku also came to the courtyard and greeted him. Chief. In the courtyard of the pavilion, Uchiha Fugaku and Uchiha Yoru were respectfully kneeling, with a pot of hot tea placed between them. It must be said that this aristocratic tea ceremony still had a certain degree of refinement. Although he was usually straightforward, Uchiha Fugaku couldn't help but frown at the young man before him, especially at this particular hairstyle. He felt increasingly helpless. Even as the clan head, he couldn't possibly order his family members to change their hairstyles, especially for such a ridiculous reason. Yoru, I heard your Sharingan has evolved to 3 Tomo. Although it was just a casual inquiry, Uchiha Fugaku's face was filled with a serious expression. A genius! Perhaps his awakening time was a little late and he couldn't be considered a genius, but his rate of evolution was absolutely top tier. From the Ninetales night of last year until now, only about a year has passed. To have awakened the Sharingan with one Tamo and now evolved it to 3 Tamo, this kind of eye-opening evolutionary speed is truly remarkable even within the Uchiha clan. Uchiha Yoru had no intention of hiding the fact that his Sharingan had evolved to 3 Tamo. He was already a formidable figure at the forefront of the storm, so naturally, he needed to utilize everything he could. Clan leader. When entering the 3 Tamo Sharingan, Uchiha Yoru, although maintaining a respectful demeanor, revealed a hint of sadness in his eyes and expression. Is it because of something related to my subordinates? Uchiha Fugaku's cold remark momentarily startled Uchiha Yaksen, but he wasn't overly frightened. After all, the 7th Division also had many elite Uchiha, so naturally, some information couldn't be kept from this clan head. Although he didn't reveal the real reason, no one was a fool. The 7th Police Department's squad had already been thoroughly infiltrated, with various forces converging. Facing this kind of pressure, compounded by betrayal from colleagues, was the most difficult challenge. Upon hearing this, Uchiha Yoru slowly lowered his head, revealing a sorrowful expression, then feigned a calm demeanor and said, "Clan leader, please rest assured, I am fine." Ninjas are ruthless creatures. From a young age, they are treated as mere tools, and the simplest friendships are often the most precious, yet they face countless difficult choices. Coincidentally, the Uchiha clan's ability to broaden their horizons required extreme mental stimulation, and even evolution required mental stimulation. This led Uchiha Fugaku to believe that the other party had undergone some kind of stimulation. With further intelligence analysis, Uchiha Fugaku deduced that the rapid evolution of the opponent's Sharingan stemmed from 2 factors: pressure from their clan and the harsh realities they faced. Yoru, all of this is for the Uchiha clan. The entire clan will remember what you've done. At this moment, although Uchiha Fugaku's face remained expressionless and serious, he displayed an extremely rich and seductive charm that captivated people. Yoru, since you've awakened the 3 Tamo Sharingan and are a member of an elite clan, these are ninjutsu techniques that only the 3 Tamo Sharingan elites in the clan are capable of learning. As the clan head, Fugaku cast aside his personal emotions. Seeing the young man before him sacrificing so much for the clan, he naturally had to learn to win him over, especially to pave the way for his own children in the future. When Uchiha Yoru saw clan head Fugaku take out the scroll from his chest, he immediately showed a grateful expression, nodding solemnly and saying, "Thank you, clan head." Indeed, the crying child will get milk to eat, and having the family sell the carpets makes the other party feel compelled to compensate them. That's the best approach. Intelligent people usually let others offer benefits, using a persuasive and comforting approach, rather than making the request themselves. Otherwise, the nature of the situation changes. Konoha, researching the secret room in the study. As the candlelight dimmed, Orochimaru gazed at the scroll, his face displaying a kind of morbid fanaticism, as if he had discovered some kind of continent. He couldn't help but let out a hoarse laugh. "Haha, so that's it. Perhaps this jutsu can achieve the goal of immortality." Just as Orochimaru was letting out a hoarse, sickly laugh, his snake-like eyes suddenly narrowed as he looked towards the door, only to hear a knock shortly afterward. With a creak, the wooden front door slowly opened, and Uchiha walked in, looking at Orochimaru in the gloomy study, holding a large scroll. His face still bearing a smile that suggested he hadn't fully recovered from his illness. Uchiha was speechless. For some unknown reason, Orochimaru's research lab, though described as a bright, tidy, modern, and technologically advanced living space, was gloomy and cold, especially in the study and bedroom, as if solely to create a calming atmosphere. "Haha, it's Lord Yi. I wonder what good news Lord Yi has brought this time." For an entire year, the Konoha high-ranking officials maintained their feigned ignorance, never mentioning the 5th Hokage election, as if they were determined to wait until the 3rd Hokage died of old age in that position before bringing it up. Looking at teacher Orochimaru, Uchiha Yoru revealed a smile, slowly taking out a scroll from his chest and handing it over while saying with a smile, "Teacher Orochimaru, this is a ninjutsu that only the 3 most talented members of the clan possess. Uchiha ninjas with 3 Tamo are almost all Jonin-level beings, and their mastery of ninjutsu is extraordinary, encompassing many techniques including ninjutsu, jinjutsu, and throwing weapons. The Uchiha clan is considered the #1 noble clan in Konoha, and even the #1 bloodline clan in the shinobi world, for good reason. Almost every ninja who awakens the Sharingan is a perfect ninja, with virtually no major flaws. If you're an ordinary ninja, following the path of ninjutsu, taijutsu, genjutsu, and various throwing weapons requires a great deal of time and training. But the Uchiha are different. With the Sharingan activated, genjutsu can be unleashed at will, and they can even counter genjutsu attacks against ninjas who use it. In terms of martial arts, having such superior dynamic visual perception observation skills means that even if martial arts are slightly inferior, in this kind of situation, not only will you not fall behind, but you can also find opportunities. As long as the difference in skill isn't too great, you can still compete. Not to mention hidden weapons. With the Sharingan's blessing, how weak could they be? And then there are ninjutsu. Leaving aside the Sharingan's ability to copy from 3 Tamo, the Uchiha clan is already famous for its ninjutsu. Therefore, Uchiha ninjas who awaken the 3 Tamo Sharingan are all outstanding among their peers. Which is why the shinobi world has a widely circulated saying that in a one-on-one fight against someone with the Sharingan, they will inevitably flee. Haha, it seems the teacher wants to congratulate Nightfall on his Sharingan evolving to 3 Tamo first. With a hoarse, cheerful smile lingering in the study, Orochimaru licked his lips with even more interest. His disciple had exceeded his expectations. In just 1 year, he had evolved to the 3 Tamo Sharingan state. He truly was a genius. Uchiha Yoru, without any hesitation, handed over all the ninjutsu techniques that were not passed down in the clan. Although this was a typical case of a son selling off his family's land without a second thought, it must be said that this act alone brought a joyful smile to Orochimaru's face. Although Orochimaru was magnanimous, no one disliked sincerity, especially since this disciple of his could set aside his sectarian prejudices. It's important to know that the Uchiha and Hyuga clans were long-standing, prestigious aristocratic families with deeply ingrained ideologies that were very difficult for anyone to break. Teacher, I hope that within the ninja clan, you will be willing to come and guide us. At this moment, Uchiha Yoruichi's sincere and heartfelt smile made it seem as if he was genuinely waiting for Orochimaru. And the teacher-student relationship between the two became even more sincere and affectionate. Opening the scroll, the various secret techniques of the Uchiha clan, while not bad in Orochimaru's eyes, were far from being considered truly precious. After all, these were techniques from the Uchiha clan, and the most suitable ones were those enhanced by the Sharingan. However, this display of human kindness, which allowed Orochimaru to experience the warmth and coldness of human relationships, stirred a warm feeling in his heart, causing him to involuntarily reveal a hoarse, cheerful smile. Di-Quan, come and take a look at the concept behind this jutsu. As if thinking that this disciple of his was capable of offering unimaginable opinions, Orochimaru immediately let out a hoarse laugh and generously pushed the large scroll in front of him. Uchiha was also filled with curiosity. When he saw the scroll densely packed with information, he was initially stunned, as if it belonged to someone researching ninjutsu, and moreover, one who had not yet succeeded. Indeed, it was filled with countless recorded experiments, followed by various bizarre ideas and secrets. After reading more than half of them, Uchiha Yoru's face immediately showed a look of shock. At this moment, Uchiha Yoru looked up at Orochimaru, his face showing shock, but not in the slightest sign of it. He was genuinely astonished by this incomplete jutsu. Seeing the terrified look in his disciple's eyes, Orochimaru also revealed a sickly smile and said hoarsely, Naikun, when I first saw this forbidden jutsu information document, I was just as shocked as you, but you should read it carefully. At this moment, Orochimaru's sickly smile was tinged with worrying. He was concerned about how his disciple would react after seeing this. Would he be furious and unable to accept it? Or would he share his ideals, or perhaps even develop the same pursuits as him? Upon seeing this jutsu, the unrealistic desires he had been suppressing instantly surged forth, his mind constantly replaying the phrase, "It's achievable. My pursuit wasn't wrong. Isn't this the path ahead? This is it. This is it." After roughly glancing through this enormous scroll, Uchiha Yoru couldn't help but feel a chill run down his spine, revealing a look of shock. This was completely filled with experimental materials on Forbidden's jutsu. Haha, Lord Knight, after reading this Forbidden's technique, information, document, what comes to mind? At this moment, Orochimaru's face, usually so sickly, showed a rare expression of anticipation. He hoped that his solitude would be overshadowed by the presence of others, yet he also harbored a fear of public disapproval. After all, Orochimaru now is not the same Orochimaru who directly severed all ties and completely disregarded the world's judgment. He is still Orochimaru, one of the Konoha Sennin. With a glimmer of hope in his eyes, Uchiha Yoru couldn't hide the fear in his gaze. Taking a deep breath, he slowly uttered 2 words under Orochimaru's complex expression. Upon hearing these 2 words, Orochimaru's expression went blank. Immortality. This forbidden's technique, as I see it, is the hope for immortality. At this moment, Orochimaru's very soul seemed to tremble, his expression blank, yet a single, transparent tear welled up in the corner of his eye, a tear that could be understood. Ha ha! Following that, Orochimaru's face contorted into a maniacal grin, his snake-like eyes filled with aggression as he stared at Uchiha Yoru. At that moment, he seemed to feel he had found a like-minded companion, and he couldn't help but let out a hoarse, loud laugh. Lord Dequan, you've truly exceeded all expectations. At this moment, Orochimaru was completely in a state of deranged excitement. If someone didn't know what he was, they would probably be startled by the scene before them, but Uchiha Yoru understood perfectly. In the gloomy study, Orochimaru's face wore an extremely sickly, terrifying smile, his snake-like eyes filled with boundless greed, his soul no longer seemed to be alone. Haha, this forbidden's technique was inspired by the second Hokage's S-rank secret technique, Reika no Jutsu, which he used to research this forbidden's technique. It doesn't have a name yet, but I, Orochimaru, am willing to call it Fushi Tensei. Seeing Orochimaru's sickly expression as he explained the existence of this jutsu, Uchiha Yoru gradually suppressed the shock on his face and began to fall into deep thought. In the original Chunin arc, during a battle between Orochimaru and the third Hokage within the barrier, Orochimaru, without any regard for the third Hokage's feelings, revealed a woman's face. At that moment, the third Hokage exclaimed in shock, "Have you perhaps mastered that forbidden's jutsu?" See the original anime for details. Therefore, it can be inferred that this forbidden's technique had an initial form, but it was still a semi-finished product. Orochimaru also spent several years researching and inventing this jutsu completely. At this moment, Orochimaru felt as if he were on his home turf, a sickly, excited smile appearing on his face, and his hoarse voice betrayed a surge of exhilaration. Do you know who researched this second-generation jutsu? At this point, Orochimaru could hardly conceal the excitement in his eyes, and excitedly said, "It was the first Hokage, Senju Hashirama." This jutsu was entirely researched by the second Hokage specifically for the first Hokage. The first Hokage returned not long after the final battle in the Valley of the Nine Heavens, and the second Hokage ascended to power. Within a few years, the first Hokage fell ill and passed away. From this, it's clear that the first Hokage must have been severely injured or suffered a significant depletion of his life force. At that point, the second Hokage had no choice but to resort to other means. The second Hokage was truly a genius to be able to conceive of this method of prolonging life. If this jutsu truly succeeds, then it would be possible to transfer souls into the bodies of young ninjas, repeatedly extending their lifespan and achieving immortality. At that moment, Orochimaru seemed to have found the true meaning of life, his excitement causing him to forget everything else. Uchiha Yoru, however, feigned a frown and shook her head in disapproval. "Teacher Orochimaru, this jutsu is not yet perfected. The records clearly show the experimental results. If the soul completely takes over another person's body through soul transfer, there will be a violent backlash. This doesn't seem to be just a physical incompatibility, but rather a taboo involving contact with the soul." Upon hearing this, Orochimaru, far from being disappointed, instead became excited and let out a hoarse laugh, saying, "Haha, Reika no Jutsu can cause the soul to leave the body, disregarding distance and killing the enemy, and can also control the opponent's body and enter their spiritual world. But the main drawback of this jutsu is that if the physical body is damaged, the soul will also be injured. Even after the original body dies, the soul cannot remain in another person's body. We just need to solve these 2 problems. Firstly, how can a soul leave a body and guarantee it won't be controlled by the original body? Secondly, how can a soul completely take over another person's body, remaining unaffected by the original body, and even experiencing what you call a backlash? For someone like Orochimaru, going from nothing to something is always a challenge, not to mention that his ancestors already possessed this initial form. He only needs to continue researching. Haha, it's clear that the second Hokage didn't complete this jutsu initially, otherwise the first Hokage wouldn't have perished, and the Great Ninja War wouldn't have happened. At this point, Orochimaru was completely engrossed in this immortality jutsu, and based on his experience, it was entirely possible. Looking at Uchiha Yoru, he seemed afraid that the other party would think it was impossible, and he eagerly voiced his own idea. Lord, since Reika no Jutsu can cause souls to leave their bodies and even control other people's bodies, it proves that this jutsu is feasible. As long as we overcome these difficult obstacles, immortality will be within our reach, you and I. At this moment, Orochimaru, in a frenzied, pathological state, stared intently at Uchiha Yoru. This thought had completely stirred within him, overwhelming all his composure. He had always suppressed this idea, fearing it would lead to a lonely path. But now he seemed to have discovered someone who might accompany him on this journey. Yes, Lord, what do you think of this jutsu? At this moment, Orochimaru couldn't wait to find out what this disciple was thinking. Although they were master and disciple, they were more like assistants. At night, he was his assistant in Konoha. Seeing the hint of madness in Orochimaru's eyes, Uchiha Yoru knew that Orochimaru had become obsessed with this jutsu, and was completely prepared to relentlessly pursue this path that the world could hardly comprehend. Teacher Orochimaru, ninjas have extremely short lifespans. Even someone as powerful as the first Hokage, the god of ninjas, couldn't escape birth, aging, sickness, and death. Although not explicitly stated, Uchiha Yoru's words were delivered with such firm conviction that Orochimaru immediately broke into a slight smile. In the gloomy study, the only sound that echoed around Orochimaru was the incessant laughter. At this moment, Orochimaru looked at Uchiha Yoru before him. Their relationship no longer seemed that of former teacher and student, but rather that of companions on the path to immortality, sharing the same aspirations. However, Professor Orochimaru, I've seen in the documents information about this forbidden jutsu that there have been numerous human experiments, all focusing on causing problems for the soul. One is how to break free from the original body's constraints, and how to ensure that the soul remains unaffected after being injured in the original body. The second is how to resist or even eliminate the backlash from another body. Uchiha Yoru only needed to read it once to pinpoint the crucial issue, demonstrating his genuine interest in the forbidden jutsu's material. Upon hearing this, Orochimaru chuckled hoarsely, saying, "Yoru-kun, don't rush. Any research is built upon countless failures, difficulties. Orochimaru has never been afraid of them. What he fears is not having direction or purpose to move forward." As for Orochimaru's unwavering devotion to Uchiha Yoru, he naturally understood that while this jutsu was ultimately successful, it had also cost Orochimaru several years of his time, and in the end, this jutsu still hadn't reached a perfect state. It still had shortcomings. Teacher Orochimaru, I have a line of thought that might be possible to try and resolve the physical backlash from the soul. Uchiha Yoruichi, after a moment of thoughtful silence, voiced her thoughts. Upon hearing them, Orochimaru immediately broke into a smile. Haha, Night Lord, your ideas have always been so novel. I'm really looking forward to the surprise you'll bring me, Teacher Orochimaru. If other people's bodies can experience backlash from the soul, what about your own body? At this moment, Uchiha Yoru's lips curved into a confident smile, a look that even Orochimaru found astonishing, and he muttered to himself, "My own body, my own." In an instant, Orochimaru's face slowly revealed a similarly perverse smile. Haha, I understand now, Night Lord, you truly surprise me. While other people's bodies are inevitably subject to the backlash from the soul, you can cultivate your own body, using your own youthful cells to create a new body, while simultaneously preserving countless of your own youthful cells, putting them into hibernation. At this moment, Orochimaru seemed to have his train of thought suddenly opened, his hoarse, cheerful voice echoing throughout the study. Orochimaru had never been so flustered before. This was the first time in his life, and also the happiest moment for him, even more exciting than becoming Hokage. The sky was filled with gentle snowflakes falling slowly, adding to the beautiful white landscape of Konoha. Hyuga clan. The houses in this border area are old and simple, separated from each other. From the layout of the houses, it's clear that the separate residences are all guarding the central strip of land belonging to the main family. In the wooden room, a teapot slowly tilted, emitting steam from the tea. Hyuga Hizashi, holding the teapot, prepared the tea with a solemn expression. His every gesture showed not the slightest distraction, revealing the profound background of his thousand-year-old aristocratic lineage. Please. After brewing a delicious cup of tea, Hyuga Hizashi respectfully gestured for them to enjoy it. Seeing Hyuga Hizashi's movements and expression, which were always so stiff, Uchiha Yoru smiled. Although he had something to do, he couldn't be impolite. This was a matter of mutual respect. Please. Raising his teacup, Uchiha Yoru, with impeccable manners, gestured, and the two of them, watching the snow fall outside, enjoyed their hot tea inside, seemingly experiencing a unique and delightful sensation. With narrowed eyes revealing a look of enjoyment as he savored the tea in his mouth, Uchiha Yoru couldn't help but say admiringly, Senior Hizashi's tea ceremony skills are truly top-notch. Dequan, you're being too polite. The two men's gestures were filled with strict adherence to established rules of etiquette, perfectly representing the interaction between two prominent families of that caliber, without the slightest transgression. Although there was no such thing as drinking too much alcohol, after a few cups of tea, both of them appeared calm and composed, as if today was simply for enjoying tea and admiring the snow. Hyuga Hizashi's meticulous self-cultivation was perfectly in place, but although Uchiha Yoru also endured it, he didn't want to waste any more time here, as his time was running out. A year has passed since the Ninetales Rebellion, and Itachi is now 6 years old, soon to be 7. However, when the protagonist was 3 years old, a major event occurred, the Hyuga clan incident. Clearly, under those circumstances, Konoha must have experienced considerable upheaval, which is why the Land of Lightning took advantage of the situation to plunder. But this upheaval, I fear, could only have been caused by the betrayal and escape of teacher Orochimaru, leading to the shaking of the entire Konoha, and even the entire shinobi world. Senior Hizashi, how old is that child this year? Uchiha Yoru set down her teacup, a smile playing on her face that betrayed no ulterior motive, while Hyuga Hizashi, remaining expressionless and serious, softly said, Neji will be 4 years old after the new year. Time flies so fast, Neji will soon be 4 years old. Uchiha Yoru's calm smile was so subtle that it was impossible to discern anything from her expression. Hyuga Hizashi was also unusually calm, but his next words completely shattered his composure. 4 years old isn't young. I heard the head of the family's child will be 3 years old after the new year. Teacher Orochimaru wants to look after the Hyuga clan's Kagu no Torai. Uchiha Yoru's gentle words immediately caused Hyuga Hizashi's expression to tremble. Hizashi, who was maintaining the motion of brewing tea, only reacted when the tea spilled onto the table. He quickly composed himself, taking out a towel to wipe up the spilled tea. I'm so sorry. I apologize for the rudeness. With a respectful apology, Hyuga Hizashi, despite maintaining his stiff demeanor, clearly had a racing heart. Seeing this, Uchiha Yoru chuckled and nodded, saying, It's you who are being too polite, senior. It's I who am disturbing you today. With the formalities and etiquette laid to rest, the two seemed to return once again to the atmosphere of enjoying tea and admiring the snow. But at this moment, Hyuga Hizashi's heart was in turmoil, and the tea in his mouth tasted incomparably bitter. In contrast, Uchiha Yoru narrowed his eyes in a look of enjoyment, his elegant movements as he savored tea and admired the snow further highlighting his noble lineage. At this moment, Uchiha Yoru seemed like a fisherman casting his line, while Hyuga Hizashi was filled with torment. The words just spoken made him lower his head, but the 3 words Kagu no Torai kept repeating in his mind. At 3 years old. The head of the family, the heir, was 3 years old when Neji wanted to engrave Kagu no Torai on his name. The resentment and unwillingness he had always suppressed in his heart, in front of outsiders, even within his own family, he could always control. But today, this demonic feeling surged uncontrollably outwards, all because of one person's name, Orochimaru. Sannin, one of Orochimaru's cold-blooded warriors, was a genius in ninjutsu, especially in the field of ninjutsu research, making him the most outstanding figure in Konoha at the time. He was a genius who excelled in almost everything: ninjutsu, taijutsu, jinjutsu, and sealing techniques. At this moment, Hyuga Hizashi tried to suppress the emotions welling up inside him, but his hand holding the teacup trembled uncontrollably, and the tea in his mouth had become bland and tasteless. Orochimaru might actually be capable of breaking through this cage because the Hyuga clan split up. This thought appeared in his mind after the frenzy began to spread. Hyuga Hizashi desperately tried to suppress this idea, but he was completely unable to control it. Images flashed through his mind, images of him writhing in agony and begging for forgiveness in front of his master, images of a man completely stripped of his dignity. Finally, as the image of the innocent, smiling Hyuga Neji flashed through his mind, Hyuga Hizashi instantly snapped back to reality. The teacup, not having landed steadily, fell directly onto the floor, making a gurgling sound as it bounced on the exquisite wooden floor. Hyuga Hizashi hastily stood up, bowed, and apologized, saying, "It was my fault." At that moment, Hyuga Hizashi didn't notice that his forehead was drenched in sweat, and his entire back was soaked. Seeing Hyuga Hizashi's respectful expression, Uchiha Yura smiled and bowed in return, saying, "It is I who have disturbed Senior Hizashi." Having finished speaking, he immediately wanted to stand up, as if to end his tea drinking and snow viewing experience there. Seeing this, Hyuga Hizashi was about to reach out and stop him, but he didn't know how to begin, and his hesitant demeanor only drew more attention. However, Uchiha Yoru, with a humble smile, said, "Senior Hizashi, if you have time, please come and see me." After all, only by personally inspecting the birdcage can one have a chance of finding the cage door. Isn't that right? With a knowing smile, Uchiha Yoru politely bowed slightly, appearing ready to leave, while Hyuga Hizashi, having heard this, forced a stiff, strained smile. For a moment, he didn't know what to do. Yes, Senior Hizashi, recently there have been quite a few financial loopholes in Professor Orochimaru's research, and today, many eyes were watching us. As she went outside to change into her own shoes, Uchiha Yoruichi suddenly remembered something and abruptly turned around, revealing a humble smile. After saying that, Uchiha Yoru respectfully bowed and said, "Thank you, Senior Hizashi, for your hospitality. I will be leaving now." Watching Uchiha Yoru's figure disappear into the swirling snow, Hyuga Hizashi's face showed a complex expression. Father, father. He didn't know how much time had passed, but suddenly a familiar scream reached his ears. Hyuga Hizashi, uncharacteristically panicked, turned his head and saw a frightened, innocent face looking at him anxiously, as if worried about his father's panic. Upon seeing this bloodline connected to the innocent face, a terrifying thought spread through Hyuga Hizashi's heart. He understood the other party's meaning from the last sentence. Today, Uchiha Yoru had come to inquire, and many people were watching, so he needed a plausible excuse. Orochimaru's research on finance was the perfect excuse. Root. In the gloomy room, Shimura Danzu, Midokado Homura, and Uchiha Kaharu, along with a masked Anbu figure, sat upright. Konoha's current high-ranking officials, excluding the third Hokage, were gathered in Root's secret chamber, discussing something unknown. First was the mysterious Anbu ninja wearing a mask, but it was clearly a female ninja. Although mysterious, she was already familiar to the three of them. She was the Anbu captain, recently promoted, and her identity was that of the current third Hokage's eldest daughter-in-law. Four people sat around a low table. Shimura Danzu, rarely squinting, took a small sip of tea. The atmosphere became eerie, and finally, Uchiha Kaharu, with a deep, knowing look in her eyes, said, "The village is even more stable now." A gentle remark broke the awkward atmosphere. Upon hearing this, Midokado Homura also lowered her head slightly and whispered, "That's right, the village can't withstand the uncertainty." Seeing the two old men acting superior because of their age, Shimura Danzu scoffed disdainfully, saying in a low voice, "The forbidden jutsu materials left behind by the second Hokage have been given to Orochimaru. Given Orochimaru's obsessive love for ninjutsu, he will undoubtedly be unable to resist studying this jutsu." When Shimura Danzu spoke so directly, Uchiha Kaharu and Midokado Homura couldn't help but frown, showing a hint of dissatisfaction, as if saying, "Danzo, we are all high-ranking individuals. How can you speak so bluntly? It's practically lowering our status." Of the four Anbu ministers, the third Hokage's eldest daughter-in-law, seeing the tense situation breaking down, lowered her voice and said, "The three of you are indispensable elders of Konoha, and your roles are crucial to the village's stability. The village has just gone through 3 wars and then faced the Nine-Tails calamity. We have only just stabilized the village and cannot afford another storm. Recently, although we haven't spoken up about it to the fifth Hokage, these voices have gradually begun to emerge from beneath the village's peaceful surroundings. But once Lord Orochimaru becomes the fifth Hokage, at this point, the third Hokage's eldest daughter-in-law's eyes showed a serious expression. Looking directly at the three of them, she said in a low voice, "Lord Orochimaru has full power and influence, and he has the support of the Uchiha and Hyuga clans, as well as the Inuzuka clan and others. Once the fifth Hokage takes office, Konoha will be completely destroyed." The words were clear. Now that they were both the third Hokage's political powerhouses, their positions were already firmly established. Once Orochimaru took office, Kimura's interests would become so vast that the major clans behind Orochimaru would undoubtedly seize their resources. This is where the problem lies. Upon hearing these words, Shimura Danzu's gloomy, one-eyed expression also revealed a hint of seriousness. Although he disliked Sarutobi Saru, at least one thing was certain. With Sarutobi Hiruzen in power, his root's influence grew, to the point where he dared to threaten some of the major clans. But what if Orochimaru were to take power? He knew Orochimaru's character very well. He was a completely self-serving individual. Add to that the power behind him, and Root would likely face severe restrictions. Thinking of this, Shimura Danzu immediately showed a hint of apprehension. As the former fourth Hokage, he sided with Orochimaru because Orochimaru's forces were mostly composed of commoners. Even if some clans were involved, their influence wasn't deep, unlike the Uchiha and Hyuga clans who were now determined to rely on him. The election for the fourth Hokage was held not long after the White Fang incident. At that time, White Fang was practically the future Hokage that everyone hoped for. Because only 5 or 6 years had passed, a very strange situation arose during the fourth Hokage election. The major clans were all embarrassed and couldn't find a place to stand. No one expected the third Hokage to take responsibility and dismiss him. Orochimaru's power is already established, and moreover, Orochimaru isn't someone who cherishes feathers. Uchiha Kaharu frowned, pointing out a crucial issue. Orochimaru isn't as easy to deal with as White Fang. The reason White Fang is easy to deal with is because he extremely values his reputation, as evidenced by Orochimaru's cold-blooded nature. It wasn't that they didn't want Orochimaru to rise to power, but rather that they didn't want Orochimaru's political forces behind him to come and compete for the benefits they held. That was the crucial point. Midokado Homura narrowed her eyes, observing the scene. Seeing this, the third Hokage's eldest daughter-in-law couldn't help but inwardly curse the 3 old foxes. But she couldn't remain silent because she wanted to reap the greatest rewards from it. 3 elders, I recall that the second Hokage, after the first Hokage's sacrifice, even researched a forbidden jutsu. At this point, the Anbu chief's voice gradually calmed as he looked at the 3. From now on, no matter who the Hokage is, what Konoha needs most is stability. A stability that will last for decades. At this point, the Anbu minister, having ascended to the position of Hokage's wife, directly and shamelessly threw out a temptation, a promise that Konoha needed stability. In other words, for the next few decades, Konoha would remain stable, maintaining its previous state while everyone's interests were preserved. Upon hearing these words, Uchiha Kaharu and Midokado Homura immediately narrowed their eyes. Given their current situation, further progress was no longer necessary. Instead, they could maintain the village's peace and development while simultaneously securing their own family's interests, a win-win situation. Why wouldn't they do it? For a moment, their gazes turned towards Shimura Danzu. Shimura Danzu, however, calmly observed the 3 with one eye, inwardly sneering. What a venomous woman's heart! She wants to use the exact same White Fang technique against Orochimaru. But Orochimaru, being of a similar temperament, wouldn't commit suicide. He was unlike Midokado Homura and Uchiha Kaharu, those 2 old geezers who hadn't thought about taking things further. He was always aiming for the Hokage position. The third Hokage's eldest son ascended to the throne, and what this Anbu chief was eyeing was the supreme and glorious position of Hokage's wife. A young Hokage, yet Konoha had enjoyed decades of stability. Thinking of this, Shimura Danzu immediately let out a cold laugh in his heart. The Sarutobi clan might want to inherit the family business, but they should also consider their own strength. Given Sarutobi Shinosuke's current age, it's already difficult for his strength to improve significantly. If the 5th Hokage's strength was deemed unworthy, Shimura Danzu immediately began to strategize, a smile spreading across his face. Perhaps he could then plot something, forcing this young Sarutobi clan Hokage to reveal his true strength, delivering a blow similar to the White Fang attack. At that time, Orochimaru's reputation was tarnished. Jiraiya and Tsunade weren't in Konoha, so the third Hokage couldn't possibly leave the village again, could he? Leaving again would be embarrassing, and would anyone even agree? Did you really think Konoha's Hokage was your Sarutobi family's? After carefully considering this point, Shimura Danzo nodded slightly and said in a low voice, but the village needs stability, and the Uchiha clan is too dangerous. Shimura Danzo also voiced his own thoughts. He could agree, but later they would definitely have to confront the Uchiha clan together. He coveted the Uchiha's power and was equally wary of them. He also considered using the future Hokage's insufficient strength to defeat the Uchiha clan, which would bring him notoriety. If things went wrong, it could end in mutual destruction. Even if he won beautifully, he wouldn't lose anything.